Yo, 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 what's up, everybody? Welcome back to Actuali Podcast. I'm Chris,
I'm DJ.
and today we are continuing our learning journey with Professor John Vervaeke as we cover his series Awakening from the Meaning Crisis. And this episode is going to be episode 25 on The Clash. And what's up, Facebook? Make sure it's actually doing something.
Is it booking the face?
There it goes, yes. Yo, 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 what's up, Facebook fam?
Hello, Facebook.
We are back. It's actually a podcast in the house.
Say hi to our biggest fan, Mark Zuckerberg, because I'm sure he tunes in every week to watch us on Facebook.
Yo, what's up, Zuck?
What's up, man?
He's probably like windsurfing right now, listening to us while he's on his pods.
Or smoking meat, because he's all about
could be
that.
Smoking some meat.
He's got
right
that
now.
nice meat smoker, the egg-shaped one.
He does. Yeah, he's human. He's a human too. It's Mr. Zuck. We do love him because he's a fellow human being, even if we have disagreements.
Yeah.
You know how it goes.
Yeah. Well,
So I'm just gonna share things up real fast if you wanna.
Okay, yeah, so I want to touch on, like, last week we were talking about, and we'll continue with this with the notes, but last week we were talking about Hegel's dialectic.
Mm-hmm.
And there, towards the beginning of it, I was postulating it as a thing and then an opposing, so like the thing and its opposite. And I will say that still holds true, particularly for how interpretations of his dialectic went, but I want to clarify is like, so within a dialectic and the healthy end of it, what I think there is you have an idea and then you test the crap out of it. You find all the flaws, and through that then you create the synthesis. So you'd have the idea, the thesis, the antithesis, all of the stuff that you could throw at it to disprove it, and then the synthesis. Where I'm still strongly placed is this Hegelian dialectic and how it has morphed as people have interpreted it is you have the thesis, this thing, but then you have to come up with an antithesis, the anti-thing, and that will form the synthesis. And I have, my problem with that is if you go through life with any idea trying to find the opposite of that idea, you're always going to find the adversarial. So it's like,
looking for an oppositional. Yes.
Yeah. And I think the healthier way of looking at the psychotechnology is probably on the end of, like, you have an idea and then you tear it a new beehole and you just rip it down and you find all the flaws in it, and then you get something more realistic, opposed to you have an idea and then you have to find the exact opposite, and then somewhere in between that exact opposite and your idea is where you get the synthesis. And we talked about Marx, and he took it completely materialistically in the sense of, like, okay, well, you have the proletariat versus the bourgeois, or bourgeoisie, or the bougie, or whatever you want to call them. So you have the oppressed and the oppressors. And the reason why I bring this up is because I think that idea is the perverted wrong form of the thinking of, I have an idea and then try to tear down my idea to see if it sticks, test it, do whatever. This is, I have an idea, I need the antithesis. So you have the oppressed and the oppressor, an antithesis for each other. That's a terrible way to look at life. Like the lion doesn't oppress the gazelle. The lion hunts it. And if it doesn't successfully hunt, it dies. That's not an opposite relationship. That's a next to relationship. Not necessarily next to and opposing, but next to, moving towards. If you break, you could break it down into, that could be more of a filial, if you want to go direction, wise, two things moving with each other directionally, filial relationship, opposed to what would you call, like, anti-filial? It'd be like, well, anti-filial, adversarial, let's just call it that. And trying to look at the world and the universe and our place in the world and the universe and our relationship with God as an individual and an adversary outside of, allegory and story can be very dangerous, because like, what if you're living a good life, but there are still things wrong with your good life, and you decide that, well, these things that could be wrong with my life aren't, say, like, chance, happenstance, the fact that life is cruel and wrong, cruel and doesn't care about what's right or wrong. It just, life's the universes. Now, if you are living in like, you're doing the best you can, and bad things happen, and you don't have that concept of, well, the world is harsh and it can be harsh and doesn't care about right or wrong, but instead what you do is say, there's an adversary that's holding me down. Well, if there's people around you, you're going to put it on the people, oppressed versus oppressed. If there's no one else around you, you're going to put it on God. And that's where we get that demiurgic, there are these lesser gods that are just keeping you in prison aspect, which from previous episodes, you'll know that I don't agree with. I ain't down with that. I don't believe that there are creators and participants that are jealous of whatever's lesser than them and holding them in this prison that we have to escape from. I don't put much credence into that.
The nightmare version of Gnosticism.
Yeah.
There's a lot of different forms of Gnosticism. There is a nightmarish side that certainly goes into some pretty dark dystopian places.
Well, like, casting our shadow on not just God, but our relationship with the universe. Like, it's unfair. Yeah. Life is unfair, dude. It's not fair that the cute little squirrel dies underneath your tire. It's not fair, but that's life. But to say, oh, the squirrel underneath your tire died underneath your tire because there's some weird demiurgic god with more energy than you that just wants to keep you in a prison and keep that squirrel in a prison. And it's like, nah, like, that doesn't resonate with me. Maybe it resonates with other people. And hey, if you want to, like, add down in the comments, if you're...
That's us creating gods in our own image.
Yeah,
isn't it? Feel free to comment, guys. If you have different opinions, we're open to it.
Yeah.
We're not particularly certain here, but we are going to challenge some conventions that we find to be...
And I'll only challenge the conventions that I have held myself, either currently or at other periods of time. Because, like, if I haven't currently held them, frankly, they don't stay in my head because my ADD is crap. So, like, it's like it has to be personal to me. If you've noticed, I've gotten a little darker in temperament as we've gone through these because, like, I'm challenging a lot of beliefs within myself and trying to parse out what is good and what works versus what doesn't. And
it's also a sign of the times. I mean, I remember when you and I started to get to talk again, and everything that was going on in the world was so heavy for us both. And I was telling you, I'm so happy to have found you here at this place. And
it's heavier now than it was then too, which is crazy. But we seem to be able to.
I was so relieved, man, to see that you had seen through a lot of the BS that was moving through.
Oh yeah, I'm ornery as crap too. So like I'm a grumpy old bastard. That's just how I am. I'm like, no, something new now.
This is one of the main reasons I brought this series up to you. Was because I knew it would be helpful. It's so painful when there is something disturbing in our lives. And it gets even worse when we don't face it. It just festers, and the fear of it just grows. It's just looming, this thing. It's like in horror movies, if you don't see the face or the creature very well, it stays scarier because your imagination has to fill in the gaps, So like that's why masks are scary, because you can't see the person's expression or their eyes easily. You can't read how they're feeling or their emotionality. And that's really unsettling for human beings. And, when you're in times when you don't know exactly what's happening, you can experience that as well. And I knew that this series is a confrontation with so much of the darkness that has caused the meaning crisis that humanity now finds itself in, but it's also something of a salve and perhaps an answer, perhaps a solution. And that's why the title of the series is Awakening from the Meaning Crisis.
Yep.
So we're about halfway through now. Episode 25. It's the Clash.
25. The Clash, right in the middle.
Really powerful episode.
I was halfway in tears listening to it as I was on my way back to the house for various reasons, but you know. So we're at right now. We talked last week about Hegel, idealism, defined what the mind was, as far as what we're talking about with mind in the Hegelian aspect and going on as we go until we redefine mind, because you know, we redefine things. So rationality versus irrationality, rationality going into the mind, irrationality moving out. And we learned from, you know, the Romantics, they moved out from the mind into the irrational, and that's the art and the music and to create.
Into the imaginal, yeah.
And we talked about the pragmatists, which believed that, you know, the world is a blank canvas to be written on, opposed to the mind and the self being written upon the world. So
the Romantics saw the world as the canvas, right?
The Romantics saw themselves as the canvas, whereas the pragmatists are like, well, we can put our will out onto the world. Like the ultimate pragmatist would be like your.
I think it's the other way around, because remember the Romanticists, they really liked. What's his name?
Look at it this way. Well, so I guess the way I'm seeing it is
they liked Napoleon. Remember? They liked Napoleon because he made the world in his image. I'm pretty sure it's the other way around on that.
Perhaps it's getting a little fuzzy. I guess the way I'm seeing it is, and you know, could be wrong here, but I would say the more romantic aspect is like you are this. Oh, you know, you might be right.
Yeah, I think you just switched it is all.
Well, that brings up something is like, do you write yourself onto the world, or does the world write itself onto you? And neither are correct.
Probably both and.
Yeah.
It's both at once. It's not either or.
Because like when it comes to the, you know, the will to power, if you will, Napoleon, he had the power of will and to impose himself on the world. But the inverse of that would be opening yourself and willing to be imprinted by said thing, the world, the God, you know, and the Protestants, you could say, are somewhat romantic in and of themselves. I don't know. I'll have to go back and look at that because it's funny. It's all mixing and it's maddening. Trying to keep track of it, but also,
well, the gist of it is that there's two different ways of seeing the world that are competing.
Yeah.
And you have this romantic or this, you could say, rational or analytical way of trying to look at things, a top-down or a bottom-up. And idealism, stating that reality is made by the mind and the real is rational.
Yeah. No.
Yeah, so it's Kant and the Romantics that influence Hegel.
Yeah.
And the rational, closer, you can get closer to contact with reality through rational states.
And that's within the mind. The mind is rational.
Yes, yes, is what so this is getting into the idealists and what the Romantics believed.
I don't think Hegel was an rationalist. I think he was probably more of the rationalist, like, you know, being able to prove, because the notes that I have here is he felt the irrational end of reality and the box that's around mind. He felt the moving out into the irrational artistic form, if you will, made no sense. Because the thing itself is unknowable and thus is indistinguishable from non-existence.
That's what he was saying. He said it's not that the mind is making rational experience, it's making structure of reality itself.
Okay. Yeah.
So our rational experience has not been fully actualized, is what he was
that would be
noticing was missing.
That would be us writing onto the canvas of the world opposed to the canvas of the world writing on us. So and then we get the idealism is everything is made by the mind, the idea within the mind.
Yeah, Hegel's the one that introduced the idea of the Geist, the mind and spirit. He saw the mind as a system of patterns of intelligibility that we use to structure experience.
Yes.
So those patterns of intelligibility are mind-made or are the mind in an extended sense. And then we have structures of reality that are constantly being developed into further rationality.
And from irrationality into irrationality. So irrationality would be the potential. So from the potential irrationality into the rational. So our rationality is not fully realized. We or something will be moving into this perfect rationality from irrationality. Which in a way kind of doesn't make sense. It's like, how would something that's like completely irrational make rationality? Like get a bunch of toddlers to run, together and have them figure out something.
Yeah.
It's probably not going to work.
Yeah, but they did notice that there's something about music and art. There's
Yeah.
something about music and art. You can't like rationally break it down, but it's telling you something deep about reality.
Yeah.
And so that's why the romanticists got really hooked on that idea, is because there is something there.
And so we get the zeitgeist, which is the mind.
The Geist, yes.
And the spirit.
Mind and spirit.
Yeah. And the idea of absolute idealism, the not personal idealism like the idea I have, but the overarching thing that can be applied to everything and everyone, this absolutism.
This absolutist idealism. It's a method or an attempt to understand history and current reality to find patterns of how we systematically make sense of things as cultures through the grammars that we developed to make sense of the world. And so they're looking for patterns. They're trying to find patterns.
And make them real. So this word realize, this is another definition as well as mind. Realize is, there's two definitions for this, is something we experience, like, the realization of something, like
a waking up, like, oh, whoa. Yeah, like an epiphany. It's also how things are made
the coming
real.
Into reality,
like,
to
okay,
make
I'm gonna,
it real.
I'm going to realize this experience. I'm going to realize this project into fruition. So that can be coming into reality in a developmental sense.
And then we're introduced to this interpretation of history. So by looking at history, you see the moving process.
Yes.
This idea that history is this moving process
of like differentiation.
And ultimately, like there can be a right history and a wrong history. How did you interpret the process? It's not here in the notes, so I'm assuming you didn't talk about it, but it's like, history is interpreted. Like, there are the facts of events, but depending on who looks back on them, the story,
still
his or her story, regardless, is going to change a little bit.
Right. Yeah. True that.
So differentiation.
Yeah. So in order to distinguish, to articulate where the joints and the division points are.
Yep. Yeah. Yep.
So that you can further integrate, basically. So it's gathering together systematic connections as participants through our behavior and our ways of living in the world. We can integrate, and the systemization process is when things get confused. Like, we stick two things together, we fuse two things together that are actually contrary to one another. When we're in those confused states, we are separating them through systemization to reframe them. So that's the process of integration and systemizing that process.
Yeah.
So living systems are articulated by differentiation and integration.
And what makes them living is through
in a systematic way.
This process between differentiating things and then finding where the differences are, and then finding, basically what makes them be able to come together. The integration will continue itself. So we're going to call it living, because it's a process that keeps itself going. Like you have an idea, you find where the breakdowns are. Through those breakdowns, you find a more efficient way to put it together, synthesize it, to use another word, but synthesize the synthesis, harmonize it.
And if any of this is confusing right now, guys, just bear with us. Basically, what we've been doing through this series and what we're doing right now is we're tracking the development, human beings' processes of developing different ways of understanding and interpreting reality.
And also, we're trying to learn this stuff too. So
to understand how we got to where we are as a species and why we're in the situation that we're in right now as a species, where you experience this broad meaning crisis across the planet, where people are feeling an increased sense of meaninglessness and disconnection from reality. There's increased division. There's increased distrust of what were traditionally trusted social systems and systems of authority, be they the church, the state, the courts, what have you. And so we noticed that this has been happening widely across the planet and at an increased rate. You get this sense of breakdown and loss of meaning. So this whole series is an answer to that. And so we're making our way through history, and we are now up to this gentleman called Hegel, and this is his idea.
And maybe not an answer to it, but a comment on it, and then a question, and then a call to adventure, if you will, if you want to go hear his journey.
We may be able to learn together how we can help usher in an awakening, but it's the solution is going to be within every single one of us.
Yeah. So we have an idea that is proposed. This idea of an idea is clarified by a counter idea. So that's thesis, antithesis, and then synthesis. So synthesis is the integration. Thesis would be your initial idea. Antithesis would be the holes that you can poke in it.
Yeah. Yeah, and then when
under
those
ideal circumstances,
Yes.
I think where Hegel took it was more like actual like anti-opposite.
Right.
So I was doing some studying and listening today from people who are way wiser than I am. This thesis, antithesis, and synthesis came from Kant, I believe, and then Hegel took that and turned it into whatever abstract and concrete. I forget what the first one is. You'll have to forgive me. It's been a long day, but still the same thing. You know, you have an idea, you counter the idea, and there should be some integration. And then the process starts itself again, and it keeps spiraling until it gets tighter and tighter and tighter and tighter. And then the idea and the anti-idea and everything becomes so close that it becomes the actual utopic thing. And also utopia means a place that does not exist. So, you know, spiral in, spiral out, and it just spirals on.
Yeah. Utopian visions throughout history have been very dangerous because people end up causing genocides to try and bring them about.
But what the spiraling is
you can't force evolution.
What we're seeing and what we're trying to do with this thesis, antithesis, and synthesis is trying to grasp greater patterns of realness.
Yes.
We're still trying to grasp realness, flawed as it may be.
That's right. That's what Hegel's trying to do. So he says when two ideas are drawn together into higher integration, so you have an idea, then the opposing idea where you're like poking holes in the initial idea. If you can bring them together into integration, if you can find their agreements, then a new idea can be developed, and then it starts the process over. So two ideas coming together into higher integration is synthesis.
Yeah.
And you get increased resolution of the complex patterns of being in the world. At least that was the proposal. And this is Hegel's idea of dialectic as opposed to like Platonic dialectic, for instance.
Yes. So this is Hegelian dialectic, which dialectic I get like in most of what I study, it goes back to Hegel, but it is much older than Hegel is. Like Hegel is a student of many teachers. And to break down who these teachers were and all that, that's other podcast. James Lindsay tries as best as he can, and he does a good job. Good on you, James Lindsay, from New Discourses. He took off a big old bite.
Yeah.
But Hegel is an interesting individual because he is a Neoplatonist, but he's also a Hermeticist, but he is also a Gnostic, but he's also in Germany at this period of time where there was many great German minds that were trying to come up with this thing. So it's like,
And the nightmare version of Gnosticism is kind of popular.
Yeah.
In that period there, in that region.
Well, particularly after, plagues and horrible stuff. It's like, dude, of course. Like, I don't blame you, dude, but like, I don't blame anybody really, but like, we got to be careful with this too. Like, and I got to be careful not to personalize and internalize a lot of different things, particularly with this, but different things within myself as I study, because it'd be like, oh yeah, that seems to work out. I'm going to be a this kind of guy, you know, whether it's a Gnostic kind of guy or this kind of, you got to stay away from that, man. Cause like nothing is truly 100% accurate to how reality is.
Don't look for happiness in your identity. Don't try and form a certain kind of identity or be in a certain team for happiness or comfort. It doesn't work. Let's skip ahead here because we're about 25 minutes in now.
I'm going to get into math and experiments. So there's the idea of things that are changeless and things that are pure change. The math is the matter, or the changeless, the thing that has no change. The experiments, you use math and you do a thing and you keep experimenting with things that change. So the experiment is pure change. Math is the changeless. And those in combination move us into. So the dialectic is a process in which we try to reconcile the self-realizing of the irrational and the rational, the thing that can be changed and the thing that is nothing, or the thing that can't be changed and the thing that is nothing but change. Let's see. There's the idea of absolute Geist, absolute spirit.
The process of how Geist is historically developing.
Yeah.
We're recognizing, for Plato, reality was changeless, and there are eternal patterns that structurally organize.
Yeah.
Hegel takes a different tact.
Oh boy, there's so much.
We have a ton of notes on this episode. We're going to zip past a lot of stuff, though, guys, because we really want to.
There's a new mythology.
Talk on this particular episode once we get into it too. There's the new mythology that comes along.
The non-religious God.
Yes, Hegel is trying to come up with a secular alternative to the Trinity.
Yeah.
And so you see a lot of this kind of stuff happening at this time. It's like these repackaging of religious ideals into the new secularized non-religious modes of or systems of organization, and that's a and we see the repercussions of that.
And just in this episode, to real quick in this Trinity, so you'd call the Father the idea, the Son the application of the idea, and then the Holy Spirit is
his Geist.
Which would be like
the
result of the Son's sacrifice, and through that it changes the Father again. So you'd have this Geist dwelling within its own self-awareness, ever perfecting itself. So Hegel had this idea of the grand synthesis, this idea that this system would eventually build itself into this grand synthesis where the idea and its application are so close together they're indistinguishable, and it would create this perfect grand spirit, this grand Geist.
He thought that we could do this. There's a secular way
not us. He thought that his system could do it because he was an egotist that thought he was right.
And so and this is why he ends up inadvertently becoming the godfather of totalitarian ideologies.
Yeah.
Because Hegel is secularizing religious ideas into in such a way as trying to give a total explanation, and not so you see the totalitarianism coming out, and
not just in a material sense as like what we get into with like Marxism, which is all material, but in a way that doesn't have the dogma of religion but can still allow you.
It's got its own dogma, though.
Well,
it's got its own
replace
dogma.
One with the other, right? Yeah, the totalist.
But there's no transcendence practice. There's no anagoge. There's no wisdom development. There's no altered states of consciousness that one is experiencing and driving towards and learning how to operate.
There's the will. There's the will to do these things. So Schopenhauer, sorry. Schopenhauer, his critique of what Hegel was talking about, well, he didn't address will.
He's missing the will to power.
Just will. And then Kierkegaard was, I love this quote, Hegel made a system and sat beside it.
Yes.
So it was just let it do its thing. So you no longer have the perspectival, the participatory knowledge.
So the participatory mode of knowing and the perspectival are rendered useless. They're rendered into just systems of ideas at this point. And this is a much closer experience of reality than the mere proclaimed, proclamation.
Yeah, because in order to have the transcendence,
reality.
we must
I don't know what I'm trying to say.
participate,
Yeah.
and we must have a perspective and participate within that perspective and within our community to transcend.
That's
so.
it. Yeah.
Kierkegaard's idea was basically is like, well, you're lacking this participatory end of it, so there is no transcendence.
There's no there's no development of the idea of co-creation.
Or the transcendence was the total of everybody opposed to the individual.
Yeah, because basically they took the anagoge out of self-transcendence. Anagoge being the process of enlightenment.
We are no longer
we're
no longer self-reasoners that transcend through our reasoning.
And then how do you take what you learned in that transcendent experience into life as wisdom?
Yeah.
That you can utilize.
The leap of faith. Just trust it. It'll work.
Right.
Just trust it.
That's what we're left with.
And
so
then
this
Marx's critique, which
so we're no longer engaged in the process of overcoming the ego, and becoming more capable of agapic love. And yes, your leap of faith, for all its grandeur, its truths offer no transformational process. These are the secular alternatives that turn into pseudo-religions that become very cult-like in and of themselves. So what's missing here is our involvement, our participation in ethical self-transcendence. Yeah, Marx says...
Well, Marx saw that too.
Mm-hmm.
And
he recognized, well, history is also driven by...
the fucking
the
monster.
Our socioeconomic activity. And he starts to see that as the main thing that everything is caused
and
by.
also
It's
this
all socioeconomic.
dialectic system was the monster
Yep.
within materialism that is trying to increase its own power,
Yeah, so Hegel woke up Marx, basically, and then Froubach, who was big at the time, he was also a major influencer.
Keep hearing that name coming up too, man.
Yeah, Firestream is what it means. He challenges Hegel, says it's not the Geist. Religion's a projection, an idealized projection of one's own humanity. And so he thinks that religion alienates man from his progression. He sees religion as a noxious projection that deludes people.
And almost an excretion, like something we,
Yes.
not just a progression, but something nasty
Noxious
that we put out.
gas that you're emanating. Yeah. So
one way to think about casting our shadow on God in reality, but yeah.
So now we're moving close to the clash.
Yeah.
Because now we have this clash. And Marx says this clash is not between ideas, it's a process of political struggle.
Sure.
We have classes in conflict. So put the ideas aside. It's all about classes.
And the participation is the revolution. So if you want that participation, you have to be a revolutionary.
Yes. And if you're not participating, then you are probably one of the enemy.
And that revolutionary
Or you're definitely one of the
participation,
enemy.
like if you go back to what Jesus was, the kairos, the right thing at the right time. Now the revolution and the player within the revolution has become that savior.
That's right.
So it's this new state that is replacing the old state. So the Son.
You're the chosen ones now. You're the saviors.
Yeah, there's the idea, there's the state, and then there's the Spirit. So the
So now you're
Father,
not
Son,
serving-
Holy Spirit. We got to change that up so
Rather
we
than
can.
serving love, you're serving the revolution.
Yeah, precisely. Well, there is no room for love within the revolution.
No.
Because it's just this totalized love
That's why their art is
above you and
crap.
not personal.
Yeah.
I could
So
go further into it,
So
but I'm
he
gonna.
provides the participation part that was missing, the participatory part
Workers
of
of
knowing.
workers of the world unite. you
Yeah,
know?
he offers a political, social revolution, and the participation that he offers is violent.
Sure.
It's totalizing.
And
It's
in the Communist
ideological.
Manifesto, he makes no qualms about that. Like
It's
there is no pussyfoot.
Providing a heaven, a secular utopia that will be the realization of all of history.
at the right realization of the
Yes.
right history, the right
Yes.
interpretation of the events that happened.
So the kairos of Christianity becomes the turn to utopia in communism.
Is that not the start of the Antichrist? If you really want to get into like end times lore and all that stuff.
There it is.
Yeah, well,
There it is. Especially
Antichrist ain't
going
gonna come down as a person, bro.
Especially if we're recognizing that Christ as Buddha, when you use the term Christ or Buddha, you're talking about something that's within all of us.
Yeah,
The inner, true self.
Yeah.
The higher self. Not the egoic psychological sense
the
of self.
anointed one, and we can once we shed ourselves, we
Hindus
can anoint
recognize this as
ourselves,
well.
and yeah.
People all over the world recognize the realized, awakened, reborn And so that inner Christ, that inner Buddha, it's replaced by the potential for that every human being has, for this high level of agapic, unconditional, non-judgmental love that is so universally healing.
Well, and as
they offer a different alternative, a violent social revolution.
well, so maybe as we move on, like, because we're going to be like trying to like come up with solutions for this meaning crisis, remember what we're going through, and not to be like the Marx and the Hegel, where our hubris gets ahead of us and then our prescriptions are worse than the disease itself.
Right? Choose no sides, but that of love.
I'm trying real hard not to cast my shadow on other people or God or anything, but dude, it's hard because like you're trying to come up with an understanding of why the things are the way they are, and all you have is your own experience, because I can't live as any of y'all or anybody else or outside myself, and like all I can do is really, like, the light is too bright, so all I can do is look within my own shadow. But if I think what's within my own shadow is the nature of everything, well, then I'm blinded to everything else.
Well, it might sound hippy dippy or like nary fairy, but these old sayings where you hear the suggestion that everybody is a face of God, or the people that rub us the wrong ways or are most difficult to deal with in our realities are also our best teachers. That kind of stuff.
Well, and particularly the ones that rub you the wrong ways because you're doing that shit. The thing that annoys you the most about somebody else is probably what you're doing about yourself.
There's some way that we do it ourselves too. So exactly, if there's something we don't like in somebody's personality that bugs us, there's
and when
something
somebody tells you about that
about us
like,
that's very similar. Yep.
Also, another thing, what people tend to like most about themselves are the things that would help them best if they changed. Like, like say the stubborn person who doesn't want to like go see the doctor or whatever. You ask them is like, okay, your health's going to crap and whatever. What are the things that don't like about yourself? Oh, okay, well, I'd like to go out and, like do things about myself and this, that, and the other. Okay, well, what are the things you like about yourself? I like the fact that I stick to my guns and, I don't cave and all that other stuff. So it's like those things that, you really like about yourself.
Are also the
it turns out that are also the things that might be,
things you like.
And also might be holding you back the most too.
True that, man.
And coming from a really stubborn dude, my stubbornness holds me back more than just about anything straight up. So it's like...
We all got it. Yeah.
Well, we should, because sometimes you need to be stubborn, damn it.
We're all here growing. It's very useful sometimes. Yeah. And we're all here growing together, guys.
Yeah. And so here we are in The Clash, episode 25. And oh boy, it's a clash, man.
That it is. This is a really intense episode, guys. Get ready.
Just a pre-warning, I might have some emotions that I don't necessarily want to put out there, but like, dude, it's still fresh.
It's getting real. And
it's only like 150 years fresh now, like from where we're at here. So it's like fresh.
Modern times now.
Yeah, we're no longer shielded by like 3,000 years worth of history. Now this is just right up in our faces.
No. All right, fam. It's time. We're jumping back in. This is episode 25 of Awakening from the Meaning Crisis series. If you enjoy this series, make sure to like and subscribe, John Vervaeke, and feel free to continue watching this series on your own. And make sure to like and subscribe Actuali podcast if you enjoy the show, and share it with your friends and family so that we can reach more people. Let's go on and do this thing. Here we go.
Welcome back to Awakening from the Meaning Crisis. This is episode 25. Last time we took a look at important developments that are centered upon the figure of Hegel. And again, as I said last time, I can't give a comprehensive analysis of Hegel's thought. It's too complex and sophisticated. I was trying to do the best I could to capture that within Hegel's thought, which is directly relevant to our understanding the genealogy of the meaning crisis. And we saw how Hegel proposes how to move beyond Kant and the Romantics by rejecting Kant's notion of the thing in itself and saying, look, reality is just the patterns of intelligibility. There is nothing above and beyond that, a form of idealism. And that as our ideas are being realized, as patterns of intelligibility are being developed, reality is also simultaneously being developed. And we took a look at this notion of, right, a system, a living, a quasi-living system of these patterns of intelligibility in development called Geist. And that Hegel proposed that development can be understood as a process that he called dialectic, echoing Plato, but I think severing the notion of dialectic from anagoge, which figures in some of the criticisms of Hegel that we looked at towards the end. This dialectic is a process in which ideas, again, not just things in the head, these are patterns of intelligibility, patterns of the way reality is realized, in both in the sense of being known and being actual. Right. There's this pattern in which ideas articulate and differentiate from each other. One idea is opposed by another, contrasted to, distinguished from, and then it is taken up in a higher order integration, and then that serves as a new idea that can be contrasted with other ideas. And this dialectical process complexifies the pattern of intelligibility. We get emerges and develops and becomes more and more. So the irrationality, the failure to understand is being slowly transmuted, actualized into deeper patterns of understanding, deeper aspects of being. And then the idea is that this reaches a state in which a system of ideas emerges that grasps the dialectical process itself, as found, exemplified, Hegel believed in his own philosophy. And this is the culmination, the state of absolute Geist. And if we remember that for Hegel, the real is the rational is the real, what we get is that this development of the rationality and intelligibility of reality is also the development of reality itself. And so this co-development of meaning and being is absolute spirit, absolute mind. This is Hegel's version of God. A secularized, non-religious God. We saw how much Hegel understood his philosophy in religious terms, but that he was always pursuing that understanding by translating religious terms and religious experience into philosophical conceptual structure. And he advocates for a new mythology, a mythology that is integrated with philosophy, a mythology of reason, which will be the last and greatest work of mankind, the culmination of all of history. I took you through an example of how understanding, right, the ability to make sense passes into this moment of self-realization in reason, as mythology passes into philosophy. We did an example of that, showing how Hegel secularized the Trinity in a historical process of the self-realization of rationality. And in that sense, Hegel is the Thomas Aquinas of Protestantism. He's proposing this grand synthesis, this grand secularization of the whole Hebraic Christian idea of God at work in history and God working through human beings and in their agapic processes to co-create the real future, the utopic but real future. We took a look at the main criticisms of Hegel. We reminded ourselves of the criticisms made by Schopenhauer about the will to live was missing, and then how Nietzsche takes this up in The Will to Power, and the centrality of the will. We took a look at the other great existential forerunner, Kierkegaard, and his criticism, basically using some of the terms we've developed, that Hegel has reduced everything to propositional conceptual knowing. He has left out the perspectival participatory knowing. He has left out anagoge. He has given us only epistemic self-transcendence. He hasn't given us existential, ethical self-transcendence. Personal transformation and transformative experience that are necessary for returning to, making deeper contact with reality has been left out. And we noted that this is also consonant with the work of L.A. Paul about how we can't reason our way through transformative experiences that are so central to the cultivation of wisdom. We then looked at another person who emphasized this lack of will and participation in Hegel's system, and this is the work of Karl Marx. And Marx's great proposal, great and terrifying proposal, is that history is not driven by reason, the man in Plato's system, but by the monster. And Marx is deeply influenced by Feuerbach and Feuerbach's critique of religion as the projection of our own humanity, and that religion is not the arena in which spirituality is working itself out. Religion is the projective distortion that distracts us from how we are the authors of spirituality in history. It is a vehicle of self-alienation. So Marx takes the Feuerbachian critique and he rejects the theistic resonances within Hegel, the idealistic. He says, no, the dialectic is not a dialectic of ideas that's playing itself out religiously. It is a dialectic of economic forces that is playing itself out politically. The dialectic is not between ideas that are in contrast, but between socioeconomic ways of life, classes that are in political conflict with each other, but are nevertheless systematically related. And as that historical process of class conflict unfolds, this dialectic will work out all the self-contradictions in our socioeconomic system, our current one being capitalism, for example, until the contradictions are resolved in a socioeconomic state in which peace and freedom have been achieved, because all of the internal contradictions that drive the violence will be resolved. This is a completely secularized version of the Judeo-Christian model of God working himself out in history to bring us to the promised land. Marx offers the participatory knowing that is missing in Hegel by proposing how we identify with our class, we identify with the struggle, and we participate in the kairos, the turning of history, by engaging in revolution. And so the totalizing, the totalitarian kind of ideology that Hegel is proposing is being wedded to the idea of violent political change within revolution. And so this is very, very powerful pseudo-religious ideologies. So what started in Romanticism has now come to fruition in that we have the proposal of secularized political, socio-economic ideologies in conflict as the way in which spirit and spirituality is to be understood and pursued, pseudo-religious ideologies. We should mention a couple of other ones that, of course, are emerging at the same time, have been emerging since the disruption in the socioeconomic life of Europe following the Black Death. We've already seen the rise of commercialism, but we're also going to see, right, the conclusion of this idea that the political arena is the place in which ideas struggle with each other and meaning is made. The secularization, of course, is going to be understood in terms of your participation, not necessarily in your class, like you have in Marx, but in other ways in which people are going to declare their political identity, and this is nationalism. Nationalism is the idea that the nation state can take the role in many ways that God has taken in the past. That the nation state and your patriotic devotion to it, your commitment to it, you're willing to sacrifice for it, your participation in its historical development that precedes you and will follow you upon your death, right, is trying to do many of the things that religion had done for people in the past. And you get the fierce nationalism that is emerging in the 19th century around the same time as Marx and Nietzsche and Kierkegaard are doing their seminal work. So nationalism, when it is understood this way, and when it is understood in terms of will, of course, gets very clearly wedded to the emerging socioeconomic and technological power driven by the scientific and industrial revolutions in Europe, and that nationalism very quickly gets wedded to imperialism. So nationalism and imperialism become ways in which people have secular pseudo-religious ideologies and identities that they pursue as a way of trying to fill the gap that has been vacated by the erosion of the Christian framework. Now, a place in which this is all fiercely happening in a really intensified way is Germany. So all of this work, all of these people we're talking about, well, not Kierkegaard, but Nietzsche, Schopenhauer, Hegel, Marx, they're all in Germany, right? And again, Germany is the place of Luther, where you get the first big, change towards secularization. Germany as a country is younger than Canada. It doesn't come into existence until, I believe, 1870, in the work of Bismarck. The Germans had been fragmented as a nation. They were not a nation state. They've been fragmented for centuries. And through powerful realpolitik, meaning, ethics be damned, Bismarck helps craft and unite the nation of Germany into a nation state. And so nationalism is fierce in Germany because Germany has finally gone from being just a cultural leader to becoming a political entity with tremendous economic, industrial power and scientific production in its grasp. Nationalism is fierce, and Germany sees itself in competition with the other nation states that have got a head start in their imperial self-promotion. Germany sees itself lagging behind France and England in the creation of world empire. So nationalism and imperialism become paramount in Germany. And then disaster strikes. And it's a disaster that actually reverberates around the world, because this whole attempt to secularize progress in terms of material advancement, scientific advancement, technological advancement, nationalism, imperialism, comes to a crashing disaster in the First World War, in which all this machinery that was supposed to bring us to utopia was seeming to take the place of God and our spiritual traditions, drenches Europe in traumatic tidal wave of blood and destruction. An entire generation is decimated. So Europe itself is traumatized by this. But Germany is especially traumatized because it is defeated. All its national and imperial and cultural ambitions are thwarted. And the victors, France and England especially, treat Germany very, very poorly. They weaken it significantly economically. They cripple it militarily. All of this is taken up in a lot of careful history, and I can't go into this in great detail. What we need to know is, let's gather this together. This is Germany in the state, post-World I, the Weimar Republic. This state of, right, the collapse, right, of German idealism, right, the thwarting of the dreams of nationalism and imperialism. Germany, as we remember, is the country that has been, I don't know what the right word, tainted by Luther's horrible anti-Semitism, the anti-Semitism we talked about, like in his work, The Jews and Their Lies, in which he proposes a genocidal policies towards the Jews. We saw that Germany is the home of the Rhineland mystics. There's been an undercurrent running through Germany that helped fuel the Protestant Reformation. But there's this undercurrent of the mystical tradition. It comes to fruition, for example, in people like Boehm, who's a German Lutheran mystic, and a Protestant mystic. A very odd thing in some ways. But this undercurrent in Germany is very Neoplatonic, very Gnostic.
All right, break time. Briefly cover what we just went over here. So he, of course, gave us a quick recap of the last episode, and we're going to pick up after that.
So the note I have for the recap of the last episode is this: this idea of the dialectic is no longer an idea, but is political.
Yeah, right.
It's within the people.
It's no longer about ideas competing with each other.
It's people competing with
It's classes competing. It's socioeconomic competition now. That's right. So he spoke about the culmination of absolute guys, the totalitarianism that starts to come forth. How there were figures like Hegel advocating for a new mythology. Mm-hmm. And it's like they took the self-responsibility right out of the process of forming stable structural, systems for society.
I'd venture to say that's probably one of the main cornerstones that they removed that caused the whole house of fucking cards. Excuse me.
I think so, man.
House of Cards to fall apart.
Yeah.
As far as this, this contradiction, this violent revolution, that will resolve the violence. It's like
you're gonna use violence to.
So you're gonna add more fire to the fire to put the fire out.
Like mass violence.
And I know somebody's going to say, well, you could burn a fire line and burn that out so it doesn't... No, that's not what we're talking about.
Different.
What we're talking about is...
We're talking about humans.
Yeah, using human violence to make a system that is no longer violent. That's the Marxist contradiction. And that's Marx was trying to reinstill... to reintroduce this perspective of knowing with
participation,
violent revolution.
Yeah,
you can know this way of being and know it if you are the revolutionary.
Yeah, previous secular answers weren't quite good enough. They were missing the will to power and the participatory aspect.
Yeah.
And so he gave the people something to participate in.
And that struggle for realness is within the political arena, not within the ideas within individuals. It's now this everybody, like everything's political.
Totally rejects the idealism of Hegel. It's not a dialectic of ideas. It's a dialectic of classes in conflict. And he also saw religion as the projected distortion that distracts us from our authorship of history. And he's got a point there. It's like we are responsible for our history. But is all religion a projected distortion that distracts us? No, certainly not.
And
I wouldn't see.
I could go on
And
the
it depends on how you're practicing your religion.
I could go
see,
on,
most Christians don't seem to be able to live up to Christianity. Same with Buddhists. Same with most
Let me go with
religious or wisdom traditions out there.
a point at the
high callings.
the secular end of that is like, okay, well, your interpretation of history, are you not doing the same thing that the religious interpretations were doing? Are you not building that same kind of architecture for yourself within the correct way of viewing history? Because as far as the way I define history, and I've defined it before, so for continuity, is history is the interpretation of events. The events happen, we interpret them.
Yeah.
The utopia is the proper interpretation, if
According to
you will,
Marxism,
of the history.
Yeah, it's also the promised land. It's like heaven. This idea of heaven that we're all going to get to if we do these things the right way.
So
this is truly a secular alternative to religion. This is why we call these pseudo-religious ideologies.
Yeah, no.
This is why they become so cult-like.
And they're no good replacement for.
Oh no, they're even more
either.
violent, which is hard to do. Like, the Christian religion was immensely violent.
Well, and then we come up with this idea of nationalism
under the institutionalized church, but Christ himself and people that really followed Christ were pacifists.
Sure.
So, you can see where the church got it wrong.
And that
even the church got Christianity wrong.
Yeah.
That's how high of a calling it is, though.
So we got introduced to nationalism,
Yeah.
which is the nation state. So your area and your people replacing God.
Yes, and this happened because the totalizing ideology of Hegel is now married to the idea of violent revolution to achieve the positivistic change that you see should happen.
Yeah, and this isn't the notes from the episode, but from what I've seen in the world is you don't have to just have a locality for a nation. It can be, a nation of people who identify with each other for whatever reason.
Like,
whether
look at the Jews,
or even, like, so it could be racial, but it could also be religious, but it could also be, like Reverb Nation, musical, or this idea of this conglomerate of peoples, regardless of the place, replacing God. I think the fallacy in nationalism is using statism to replace God, and it's like,
doesn't quite
God
work
is
out.
irreplaceable and infinite. So like, be careful what you put in that hole.
It can fill out a lot of holes, and that's why they tried it. And we tried it because you can sacrifice for your nation, you can obey, it can protect you, it can take care of you.
Well, it's this emerging power. It has power. Like the nation has this power as it grows.
We're trying
out,
really hard to replace religion in the world at this point in history, and this is what happened during the 20th century, last century, guys.
So we go from the nationalism into imperialism, which is
because Germany felt like it was behind, so it had to catch up. So it gets intensely nationalistic and imperialistic at once.
Well, it's identity, identifying, like, as like German
looking for identity.
Was at least two Germanic tribes that were dominant at a different point.
Many disparate tribes that came together and then built larger tribes, and then those tribes competed.
But now we've got this idea of a very new idea of this German identity, this imperial identity that can be spread out to fill the gap of the religious framework.
Yes.
So it's like, like no longer, like maybe they all had the same religion. Well, at this point in time, they're all probably somewhat Christian and pagan still mixed, depending on how deep in the woods you were.
Yeah.
But now it's like, well, okay, regardless of who you worship, is this identity, this imperial identity of being German is the most important.
Right. Yeah. So Germany, which was fragmented for centuries and is younger than Canada, gets united by Bismarck. And this guy's like, ethics be damned. So Germany under nationalism plus imperialism, with the sense that they got to catch up.
Yeah, they got to catch. Well, that's the
to-
thing, and they were behind their contemporaries, so they
Yes.
had something to prove, and they had to really push
This
towards go faster than what nature would healthily allow, if you will.
Yeah.
So it's
This
like,
is
I
what
got something to
happens
prove.
when we identify with our ego too much on a national level.
Like
It's
what you said,
poop-ar.
consequences be damned.
Yeah.
Or morality be damned. Like, no, let's go, because we're behind everywhere else. We need to build this national identity that we can spread out into everybody else.
Yes. So nationalism, known in terms of will, merged with commercialism, then imperialism, pseudo-religious identities, were then being pursued by people to fill the gaps left by the religious framework. So the unification of Germany happens, and then disaster strikes,
World War
reverberates
I,
around
baby.
the world, and we attempt to, and this attempt to secularize progress backfires enormously.
And a whole generation of this national identity of Germans after, World
Decimated.
War I was destroyed.
Yep.
And
Total decimation.
yeah, and then the victors were like, well, screw Germany. We're going to make you pay for it too.
Yep.
It's just like, man, like,
So the world is traumatized. Germany is traumatized. This is the end of World War One.
are they not the oppressed by the victors?
And they really thought that they could take us to utopia and replace God, and they drenched Europe in blood trying to do so.
And then when they lost,
Yes.
there was the victim card mentality, and that's why I
Yep.
don't like this oppressed versus oppressor stuff, because like
No.
what you see, like World War One, the normal people of
Everyone's
after World War One, they were
dividing.
very oppressed. They were burning their money for heat and wiping their asses with it.
Yeah.
Like that's
The
where
way
it
that we
was.
try and divide ourselves like this, it reminds me of that song Right Into by Tool. Really good song. Monkey killing monkey over pieces of the ground.
Yeah, monkey.
Don't these silly
killing,
monkeys know
yeah.
that there's enough of eating to go around?
Yeah. But this also shows us the danger of, like, you may have good reasons for feeling like you have been oppressed.
Mm-hmm.
But now we got World War II to go through. Well, what are we leading into? It's like, yeah, like the Weimar Republic, they were told to pay everything off for the previous generation
Yeah.
that did it. And they were, the people don't care. The people worry about, like, can I feed my kids?
Yeah.
So you wonder why people do heinous things. Because it starts with, I'm trying to feed my kids and get what's good for me so I can keep going.
Mm-hmm.
But then you bring this idea of nationalism. You've got this incorporating nation. And it's not God you look up towards. It's this combined community of the nation that you're looking up towards.
The party.
And the nation will
nation.
always have less moral value than God, because God is the highest moral value.
It's
If
transcendent.
you get
Yeah.
rid of God, now you're just stuck with the values of the people that are within the nation. Now, don't you? That's the
That's
danger.
why transcendent values of goodness and
This
love
is one of
are
the parts that started
very
tearing me
powerful
up.
and
It's
helpful
like,
for humans to have access to. You need something better than us to try and rise towards.
and
We're
you
just
know,
rising towards each other.
I
It's-
can't entirely blame the people of Germany at this period of time
Yeah.
for delving into the nihilism and be like, no, like, we are a people. We have been trod upon. We were screwed by the victors of this war.
You see
and
how
we
people
only
get
fought
lost.
this war because of people who wanted to fight this
Yeah.
war that aren't us either.
This argument's
We're-
often made by psychologists. Like, if
Oh,
you
man.
think that if you lived during the Third Reich in Germany, that you would have treated Jewish people any differently than the other Germans,
chances are you probably
that you wouldn't have turned people in and this and that you wouldn't have done horrifying stuff just to protect yourself, and even
Nah, you would have been you would have been right there
supporting what was happening to the
setting them
Jews,
through. You would have been right
playing
there.
along, not speaking up.
Yeah.
Yeah, most people actually would have. Yeah.
And-
In fact, yeah, virtually all of us would have.
I
Like I
probably most
all of us,
likely would
every
have,
one of us.
like,
Like
just
we
being
can't
real,
exclude
dude.
ourselves from this. It's a horrifying realization, but evil begins at the heart of every human being. It's not in a particular ideology. It's not in this belief system or that belief
well,
system.
the only
It's
foothold
in us.
the only footholds of evil are within the hearts of man. The
Yes.
rest of it's just nature, cruel and impartial as it
Yeah,
is.
no, it's just ruthlessly neutral, if anything. Yeah, it's the way
But
it feels.
evil can only take steps up through the heart. I don't know if anybody ever
Yeah,
said
I mean,
that,
you got to
but-
dehumanize other people before you can start doing harm to them. And when you start seeing large swaths of populations in your countries being dehumanized fiercely, pay attention. Beware.
The hurricane is not evil, but the willfully saying, "No, we got materials to help people in the hurricane, but we're not going to give it to them." As in, they are our responsibility, and we should be doing this.
Laughing at people suffering because they're a political party. Believing all of those people to be a certain
Well,
thing.
evil has no
because-
handhold or foothold except in the
Yeah.
hearts of man. So let's go.
Really.
So this is what's actually, like, listening to this, on my way back, what started breaking me up is just like, no, like, in this period of time, I would have just been just a subject and willing to have somebody come rescue
wouldn't
me
have known
with a
any
strong
better.
personality to save
We would have been
me
drinking the
and
Kool-Aid.
save my people. And
Yeah.
I'm a proud American, I'm an anarchist, but I'm a proud American. America is beautiful. It's given me everything it's got. And luckily I started finding out the fishy things that are in this country, but still it's like, hey, if my side starts doing what's right, I'll probably go with them and won't realize it till it's too late.
Yeah.
And that's what scares me. It's like,
Yeah.
and I've already had one instance of this. I used to be of the left. I used to be of the, super hippy dippy, like do everything look. I don't know what happened. COVID was a real thing, but it changed me. And if it wasn't for a lot of shocks to my system, I'd be going along with it. I'd be cheering on all these horrible things.
Oh, dude, when I started seeing the left calling for violence, excusing violence, and this and that, I
could have been the
horrified,
person cheering it on, because I was like, oh, it only takes 15% of the population to win the revolution, and I was all about it when I was a teenager in early 20s.
Yeah.
Can I make the right decision next time?
Right.
When, say the people, you call them the right or call them whatever you freaking want to call them. I call them center and disaffected center. Mm-hmm. When they get their way, will I be able to have this revelation again? Or am I just going to go with it and just be what I find disgusting and horrible
I know,
now?
right.
Like, this is what's breaking me up about it.
Yeah, guys, can we start calling out our friends on the extremes of the far left and the far right for
Just
any
the
calls
far?
to violence? Just the far in any direction. Can we just start calling that shit out and stop abiding by it and letting it just happen around us? Because it's not good. It's not healthy. The kids that are growing up in this world got to be really lost, confused, and dismayed.
If anything, if your answer
to see the adults going at each other like this, like not even trying to solve the great problems facing our species and our planet.
Well, if the answer to that question is no, I don't feel comfortable with calling out my friends and my loved ones about that. Can you call yourself out?
Can you call
about that?
yourself out, man?
And I won't say something like that. I'm somebody that can call myself out about this, but it's like, that's a question I ask myself.
Right.
Can you call yourself out? Like, even if you can't call out your friends and everything else, like, can you call yourself out for the things that breach your morality?
Yeah. Just like you check yourself for tics when you get home, check yourself for ideologies. Check your psychology for ideologies. Catch when things are getting stuck in your craw that might not be healthy, that are causing you to look at other people in a way that dehumanizes them and gets you closer to being willing to excuse or justify violence. Just the dehumanizing in and of itself. I mean, it's the first big step to that, and that's what we're trying to stop here, right? The infighting and the further degradation into civil discord.
Well, I'm an anarchist. I was there. Like, when I was younger, it's like, fuck it all, fuck them, fuck, screw the man, all the norm, all that stuff. And now I realize it's like, what I was preaching when I was younger was, I won't say toxic, but grew seeds. Fertilize the seeds of things that I wish not to
have supported and helped grow. Yeah.
Well, I wish that I would not subject the next generations to.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's gonna happen to us all. And trying to find the right thing to support, because we're caring beings in this world, and we hear about suffering and injustice and environmental destruction and all these things. We care and we want to do something about it. All I could say is really look at every side of every story that you can possibly get. Find the good faith actors on all sides of political views so that you have a conservative, reliable conservative person that you might not agree with, but you can tell that they mean well, they care, and they're acting honestly. Even if you disagree with them, you can tell they're acting in good faith. Look for that person on that is, look for those journalists. So follow a libertarian, a conservative, an independent journalist, liberal, progressive, whatever. Go across the board. Have 6 or 7 of them from various perspectives, so that you can
go
that's
hang
the
out
only
with
way
your
to keep
friend
an eye on things nowadays.
Go hang out with your friend that you stopped hanging out with because they said something that made people feel uncomfortable.
That's
and then ask
very,
them about
very well said.
Ask them about what
Yeah,
what
because
they
there's
believe.
something going on that is a little bit suspicious or weird to you, that your conservative or liberal friend might be like, oh yeah,
Oh, it's all suspicious.
I
and
can tell you more
freaking
about
weird.
that.
But
Let's reconnect with each
really,
other and try and figure these things out together instead of in an opposing kind of dialectic. Let's get side by side, like
Yeah, the
DJ and R here
filial-
right now, and
yeah.
just figure this thing out together.
Yeah, yeah. The filial dialectic opposed to the either the consuming end where I have to consume the other,
Yeah. Rather than my side versus your side,
Yeah.
because basically what people are doing right now is they're signaling, "Hey, I'm a part of this tribe. Hey guys, I'm a part of what you're a part of too. So don't hurt me." And give me accolades and everything, and help me feel like I'm on the right side. And that's
And
pretty
it's-
much what we're doing. Is we're basically just announcing to our tribe that, hey, I'm on your side. It's not, you're not really being virtuous
And
when you
it's
signal an idea.
it's not so new either.
You
You
gotta
know,
actually
it's
do
like,
something virtuous.
My God is better than your God. My God could beat up your God. How long have we been playing that game? Well, what has replaced God? The nation state. Oh, my nation, whether it's the country that I'm in or the set of ideals that I have or the community that I'm in is better than your. No, it's like, yeah, maybe it's better or not, but how do you really know if you're going to hold yourself and be like, well, it's just better because somebody has said it enough that
Yeah.
it is.
Well, have you looked at the other ideas in depth?
Well,
no, because those ideas are disgusting. They're poison, and they're this or that.
but most of the things we only believe them because they've been stated enough that we just
Yeah,
take it as real.
Yeah, that's why you should always take Buddha's advice on that one, man. And
Don't
give it
believe
to you guys
nothing
one more time. Don't believe nothing.
until you can break it down for yourself and poke holes in it yourself.
That's it. Don't believe anything just
and then
because your
still
parents.
be skeptical because you can
Yeah.
always bullshit
Yeah,
yourself.
don't believe anything because your parents say it, because your teachers say it, because your priests say it, because any authority says it. Don't believe anything because it's very popular and a lot of people seem to believe it, so it seems confirmed. Don't believe it. Don't believe anything until you have looked into it for yourself thoroughly, investigated it thoroughly and deeply, and found it to be good and true for one and all.
And you should
Then
still
accept it and
you
live
should
up to
still
it.
probably be skeptical of
Oh,
that
he also
too.
says, don't believe anything even if I say it, as
Yeah,
Buddha,
yeah,
Yeah.
skepticism is healthy, and it's kind of like salt. You need a certain amount of salt for every meal
Yeah.
to make it taste proper. Most of our palates for salt, we want too much salt, which is unhealthy, but just the right amount of salt just makes it fine.
Yeah.
And then you question yourself, it's like, do I need that salt?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then you don't eat it with the salt, and you're like, yeah, actually, I need
Yeah.
that salt. Okay, yeah, no, it tastes like garbage if I don't put that small amount. But, like, hey, what can I use instead of salt? Celery. Oh, I could cook down a stock out of the meat because I want the savory, not the salt. Oh.
Yes.
See, it opens up possibilities if you're
Yes.
constantly questioning your own stuff like
Yes.
this.
Celebrate being wrong and finding out when you're wrong. Who cares? We're just protecting our egos here, and who cares? Like, I'm not going to blame you. I'm not going to care. I'm not going to judge you for a second if you were wrong about something. I've been wrong about so much in my life, and I'm glad for it because it's gotten me closer to something. Because we're just looking for the right
anything,
orientation,
we're gonna
rather
delight in it,
yeah,
you
rather
know,
than
it's like-
certainty.
Oh.
Rather than certainty about what is, let's just be open to figuring these things out together and continually upgrading our knowledge and never being too certain, so closed that we are not able to take in new information and challenge our own conceptions. How else are we going to grow here, guys?
So where we pause, there was the Weimar Republic, the blaming of the Jews, the Rhineland mystics.
Oh yeah, Luther calls for the eradication of Jews previous to this, so we're setting the stage for what happens next in Germany.
And then there was Boheme, which the mystic, which
Oh, yeah.
probably led into the Bohemian, which
Yeah,
I know that affected the French as well. It's actually a French dressing style, Bohemian, drab colors and such. But that's kind of where we're at, roughly.
Yep.
Yeah. So yeah, the World War One, new founded country or new founded nation, Germany, got screwed, and then the victors were now the oppressors, and now they have this oppressed versus oppressor thing. And who are they going to blame instead of themselves? They blame the Jews.
Yep. Yep.
So there's always somebody to blame if you want to play
so the
oppressor.
oppressed
oppressed.
became the oppressor, if we're using that language, that gross
That's why I don't like that. The
neo-Marxist
oppressed
language,
versus,
oppressed versus oppressed. Yeah, been
That's
hearing
it,
that over
I'm
here in
not-
the States a lot lately. It's
yeah,
little
but
strange.
that's well. It
Well,
makes
this
a
is-
lot of money, and then you don't question anything because how dare you question your own donations to the cause that helps the oppressed?
oh, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm
by-
looking at I'm looking at you, blank LM Global whatever.
Oh, you mean the people that bought themselves mansions and didn't do anything
Yeah,
for the people they're supposed to be helping?
and couldn't care about people killing each
They got a
other
really
on the-
good sounding tagline that we all agree with,
Yeah.
that we want to support, but they're run by neo-Marxists and they're keeping so much of that money for themselves and buying little
Well, because they
multiple
deserve
houses,
it.
like
Because
nice
they're making the
houses.
revolution happen. Because
Oh,
they deserve
They
it.
deserve,
Because
what about the rest of the?
Yeah,
Oh,
but they're just bodies.
they're special ones.
Especially colored bodies.
What about all of the other colored bodies that aren't getting?
Yeah. Well,
What about their donations that were supposed to go to the cause? Oh,
Yeah, well, they don't care about that. But I can't
Hmm.
speak on that because I am not the right persuasion to speak on that.
well, you're partially.
Not enough for it to count.
Oh, because it's got to show up enough on your face for people to think that you're.
Well, that and most of my family is French, and the French are like, "Oh, you got beautiful daughters."
I've still yet to meet a white person. All I see is like
beige.
I
pink.
see peach people
I
sometimes.
see a lot of red people because they spend too much time in the sun or they drink.
Yeah, that's actually what a lot of Europeans were called by some
All right,
Asian
for you
people.
guys who
was
don't know,
red.
we're talking-
We were called
we're-
red because we are. You can see our blood through our face because our skin is so translucent.
We were talking about the BLM Global Initiative, who spent way too much money on aggrandizing themselves and not actually helping the people that they claim to help because of the victim mentality.
Yeah, man.
And don't get me started on that crap. Those people, like, if there's a cold spot in hell for them, there's a cold
Talking
spot
about the
in hell for
leadership,
them.
not anyone that supported it.
Nope,
Mostly good
yep.
people supported that movement.
Nope, the leadership, the leadership. I feel sorry for the poor suckers.
They
who
were
thought that.
using-
Yep.
They were using something that was guised as benevolent for something else entirely. That most people that were supporting the movement wouldn't support, like destruction of the nuclear family and whatever some of the other weird tenets that they had.
Oh, this is a whole nother podcast.
This is a whole other subject. We could
I've
go on
got
for a long time, yeah.
screenshots to prove the
Yeah.
craziness. Oh my goodness.
But we don't think any of you are inherently racist. Besides, all human beings have a little bit of fear of the stranger. People that
And
look
group
different.
backgroup
They could sound
preferences.
different. You could just have different clothes on, or you have a different speech.
I'm a product
a
of the
different
90s.
language.
Dude, like in the 90s, we had Sesame Street, and
But
Sesame
that's why we
Street
have-
showed everybody.
That's why we have all these like different ways of like letting strangers know that we're safe, and
Yeah, and you think that Stratocaster...
music is like one of the best ones we got.
When you think that Stratocaster guitar is some Western
about to say,
invention, that
yeah.
thing came from India like 1,500 years ago, and it just
But
got reiterated
You think
over
rock
and over
music
again.
wouldn't have happened without our cultures mixing? We appropriated the shit out of each other's cultures,
And
in
we
this
got the
country.
best food and the best music because of
because
it.
because of that. Yeah.
So
Okay.
hey, you know what? Let's make a new ideology based around food and music, and it'd be better than what like Marx and all these
Love
other
it.
crazy bastards came
Dig
up
it.
with.
I'm down.
We'll
I
call
am
it we'll
down.
call it food and musicism. You know.
We're gonna be shooting bananas and shit at people, just like Bill Hicks wanted.
Oh God, Bill Hicks. God bless him. Dude, oh man, he lived
Yeah.
on this planet as long as he could, because I think he would have probably created some like black hole creator of like just ungodly.
Remember he talked about like
Sarcasm.
taking all the money that we use on guns and war and bombs and missiles and use them to feed everybody on the planet.
Oh, yeah.
Which they would many times over. And there's this one version of that skit where he's like, you're flying over like some impoverished area.
Yeah,
and
instead of
you're like,
dropping
hey, there's
bomb-
somebody. And then you like shoot some fucking like bunch of bananas and tropical
bomb
fruit,
dropping
whatever.
food on people instead of yeah.
That guy looks hungry. They look hungry.
But yeah,
Why not?
I'm glad we got to have this cheerful moment because, dude, like as we go
What
on,
else we got, man?
man, this is episode 25. We're halfway through, man, and this is one of the reasons why I agreed to
Dark times when we turn up
do
the humor
this
in the art.
show was like I was kind of at my wit's end with all this, man. Like I was tired of being called it.
Well, dude, yeah, I'm spinning wheels here. Like, what do I do? Like, I know that art is
wanna
very
I
powerful
wanna
at
help
helping
people, but
influence and change
how-
culture, but
how-
I'm just one person.
Yeah.
But I want to spark off as many candles as I possibly can, and you guys go out there and you spark off more candles. You start doing whatever in whatever way you want. It could be art, it could be a YouTube, it could be whatever it is. It's in your personal interactions every day, and it's how we talk with our family and friends and how we approach the many crises that our species face together. It's in how we orient ourselves to the world. So
Did you see that post that I posted after George Floyd died? So I posted a post, and regardless of what side you're on, I got really good response. But may this fire be a light. Basically, is like, may this light the candle, like basically light candles for people to see and understand our community, opposed to the wildfire that's just going to burn everything down. And that was like right after that happened.
That was
It's
just
like,
the right thing to say.
But you know what?
At
The
that
same
moment.
people that liked it, when I showed the riots and what was actually going on, they were the first people to jump on me and tell me I'm a despicable
being
human. It's weird.
Unfortunately, influenced by the media and by their emotions, and everyone was locked up in their houses in a state of PTSD,
So-
under quarantine at this point in time.
I guess
so
the more,
this,
yeah,
it was it worked really, really well. It's a
But-
very powerful conditioning technique that they pulled off on people around the world.
But the moral of this story,
Most people didn't see the degree of violence and destruction that was happening.
I guess the moral of this story
In those
that I was
riots.
trying to put out there, and like, so past self looking out for future self, is be the candle that sheds light onto things that others may not be able to see. Maybe shine light onto the candle so somebody else can light a candle. But be careful, you're carrying fire, and you can burn down the forest. So when you're holding the candle, you have responsibility.
Yeah.
You can light the way, but you can also burn down the forest.
Yeah, you can also light the wrong way.
And that's what I'm seeing actually going through all this, you know, like as we
very
go
easy to
through,
do.
it's like you could
It's
have these great
very
ideas that are great. And
easy.
you can be this candle, this
Yeah,
bright
man.
fire, but then it starts burning shit down. And it's like, dude, like, and now
You
I
can
got to
have
start
totally
questioning the
great
advice I give to
intentions.
people. It's like, I don't want to give advice to anybody
Yeah,
anymore.
I know it's a little
Like-
tricky because you can have totally great intentions for which there can be incredibly disastrous repercussions, and it's really hard to map out the ways that things will go sometimes. That's why I latched onto these. When anyone starts talking about how can we orient ourselves to the world in this way, I recognize that's where the sea change can happen and be most effective. Because if we change the way we orient, then we're going to be making less of those mistakes because we're not orienting from a sense of certainty and desperation. It's patience. It's the patient guidance of love, of wisdom informed by love that helps us delineate between different potentialities and hear them out to a great extent, allow them to compete against one another in a dialectic of ideas before we put them onto paper and then into actuality.
Yeah, well, you know, let's make sure that the dialectic stays within ideas instead of turning it material, because we know what happens when you do one thing versus another thing in material opposed to
You
ideas.
turn it into an ideological movement.
Yeah, it
and
starts turning into grenades and lead. So
it's
let's
very
be
easy to get
careful.
possessed by our ideologies. Ideologies are inevitable, and there are modes and ways of experiencing and interacting with reality, but we can be possessed by our ideologies, and we can lose our capacity for critical thought when we become too deeply possessed by them. And it's very easy for that to happen to anybody, no matter how intelligent they are, because we are so easily emotionally manipulated in a way that bypasses our intellect.
Yeah, it happens to me every day. Usually around 11:30 in the morning when the coffee wear off, and I'm not at lunch, and I'm just like, oh, burn it all down. Then I get lunch, and I'm like, okay, we're good, all right, yeah. So that was a bit of a long one, but
No, it's good.
here we are as the Weimar Republic. They're in a hard spot. They're blaming the Jews,
Yep.
the Riley mystics, who they've been basing. Who the primary thought within Germany was coming from. They're kind of dying off, but still the lineage is moving on. And then there's Boheme.
The undercurrent of those mystical traditions.
Yeah, and it's still moving on. And actually, those mystical traditions, like as we move on, you'll start to see like the Nazis were very
Themselves,
mystical,
yes.
very mystical themselves.
Dark occultism.
Well, play with Satan.
throughout
Play
that
with
one.
Satan all you want, but realize that he wins every bet. So, what are you playing with?
Yeah, really.
Just saying, it's a losing game.
All right, guys, let's jump back in here. I'm going to rewind Mr. Vervaeke a bit before we continue on. So let's do that first. Try and I love the freeze frames of these goofy faces.
Oh yeah, so if
Okay, that's-
we should make a
this
meme
part
of
right
like
here is good.
Vervaeke like images, like him
Oh, we
doing
should.
things
We
like.
need someone just to go through the series and take all of the best freeze frames. They can
Oh
do.
yeah, and just make memes of him like when he's going like this. You know, like make a meme of him doing this, and then a meme of him doing like shoulders down, and then a meme of him slapping the board.
Yeah,
You
he's
know,
got some
like stuff
incredible
like that.
lines.
It's
just-
great.
Most of them are long and expansive, so they'd be like packed memes. Every once in a while, though, maybe we'll get a short, succinct
Or
quip from him.
here's a good meme. You ever have a spider web stuck to your head and you just can't get it off? You know, like even memes like that. We love you,
Yeah,
Vervaeke.
that works
Thank
too.
you,
I like
brother.
that. I like that. That's good. All right, guys. Here we are. We're jumping back in.
It doesn't come into existence until, I believe, 1870, the Bismarck. The Germans had been fragmented as a nation. They were not a nation state. They've been fragmented for centuries. And through powerful realpolitik, meaning, ethics be damned, Bismarck helps craft and unite the nation of Germany into a nation state. And so nationalism is fierce in Germany because Germany has finally gone from being just a cultural leader to becoming a political entity with tremendous economic, industrial power and scientific production in its grasp. Nationalism is fierce, and Germany sees itself in competition with the other nation states that have got a head start in their imperial self-promotion. Germany sees itself lagging behind France and England in the creation of world empire. So nationalism and imperialism become paramount in Germany. And then disaster strikes. And it's a disaster that actually reverberates around the world because this whole attempt to secularize progress in terms of material advancement, scientific advancement, technological advancement, nationalism, imperialism, comes to a crashing disaster in the First World War, in which all this machinery that was supposed to bring us to utopia was seeming to take the place of God and our spiritual traditions, drenches Europe in traumatic tidal wave of blood and destruction. An entire generation is decimated. So Europe itself is traumatized by this. But Germany is especially traumatized because it is defeated. All its national and imperial and cultural ambitions are thwarted. And the victors, France and England especially, treat Germany very, very poorly. They weaken it significantly economically. They cripple it militarily. All of this is taken up in a lot of careful history, and I can't go into this in great detail. What we need to know is, let's gather this together. This is Germany in the state, post-World I, the Weimar Republic. This state of, the collapse, of German idealism, the thwarting of the dreams of nationalism and imperialism. Germany, as we remember, is the country that has been, I don't know what the right word, tainted by Luther's horrible anti-Semitism, the anti-Semitism we talked about like in his work, The Jews and Their Lies, in which he proposes a genocide, genocidal policies towards the Jews. We saw that Germany is the home of the Rhineland mystics. There's been an undercurrent running through Germany that helped fuel the Protestant Reformation, but there's this undercurrent of the mystical tradition. It comes to fruition, for example, in people like Boehm, who's a German Lutheran mystic, and a Protestant mystic, a very odd thing in some ways. But this undercurrent in Germany is very Neoplatonic, very Gnostic. We've seen, as I said, the collapse of German idealism under the critique of the alternatives by Marx and the existentialists. But German idealism also seems to fail because of the critiques that are coming out of positivism and a philosophical position that is wedded to the tremendous success of scientific materialism. Scientific materialism. Marxism is arising in Germany as a real threat. We saw, of course, that Germany was the home of the powerful Romantic tradition. Goethe is one of the important generators of the Romantic tradition, and we saw how Romanticism is also becoming decadent in Germany. We have the ongoing fragmentation caused by the Protestant Reformation. The Germans have developed in explicit form the idea of will to power. There's this resentment, this undercurrent of Gnostic mythology, anti-Semitic religious traditions. The collapse of German idealism, leaving this philosophical vacuum. The collapse of the Romantic tradition, also leaving philosophical vacuum. The thwarting of nationalism and imperialism. The advocacy of a will to power as the way in which human beings can recapture the lost self-transcendence. And of course, that nationalism and that anti-Semitism very quickly integrate with a racist interpretation of history to try and replace Hegel's idealistic interpretation of history or Marx's socioeconomic interpretation of history. And all of this is drawn together in the autodidactic vortex of Hitler's mind. We talked about the dangers of a fragmented, autodidactic approach to the meaning crisis. The meaning crisis is being driven to a fever pitch in the Weimar Republic. And all of these forces are being spun in a romantic, and I mean that in a decadent sense, romantic, willful, autodidactic manner. Reading Mein Kampf is a difficult thing to do, not just because of the abhorrent moral stance of its author, but because it verges on incoherence because of the attempt of
What in the heck is happening?
trying to articulate all of this
Aha!
personally.
Okay.
See,
Internet issues, guys.
and this is not a coincidence.
I'm going to pull him back just a
Yeah,
little
let's
bit
pull
there.
him back a little
I
bit.
think.
Sorry about that, guys.
Yeah, sorry. And I realized when I was rewinding back 20 seconds, I must have gone back a few minutes, but that was a really good part to recap.
We're also
so
having
sorry.
a lot of winds coming in, so if
It is
the
windy
internet
here.
goes in and out, sorry, West Virginia.
This should be good in post. I'll clean it up in edits.
Cool.
All right, here we are. We're back.
Parents, because of the attempt Hitler has of trying to articulate all of this personally. See, and this is not a coincidence, I think. Hitler is like Luther. Be careful of this analogy. I'm not claiming an identity. I'm not trying to insult all Lutherans. But what do I mean by that? Hitler sees his own personal struggle, Mein Kampf, my struggle, as representative of, emblematic, symbolic of all of Germany. And beyond that, of all of Western civilization. And he exemplifies this chaos. And he articulates this weird mythology. You see, you misunderstand Nazism if you understand it only as a political system. If you understand it only, for example, as fascism or racism. It is those things. But you have to understand that the fascism and racism are actually in service of a Gnostic nightmare. I mean, you can feel all like the currents of, we have our true self, we're born with it. Well, that's, it's in our blood. You can hear decadent romanticism, and then you can hear the Gnostic. Here we are. We are actually a master race, but we're trapped within a worldwide conspiracy, right? That is keeping us from knowing our divine heritage, and only by opposing and trying to thwart the evil overlords can we come to our true divine heritage as the master race that is in our blood and in the soil of our nation. Do you see? And of course Luther's anti-Semitism is mixing up with a strand of Gnosticism that says, if you remember, the people that worship the demiurge is, the people who worship the God of the Old Testament are the Jews. And this all makes a weird, twisted kind of sense. It's a Gnostic nightmare in which Hitler is crafting something that hangs between a religion, a totalitarian ideology, and a personal mythology that he exemplifies and people are attracted to. You shouldn't understand, and you can't respond to Nazism as if it is just a political movement. You're not getting it. It is a pseudo-religious ideology, a totalitarian proposal that confuses and distorts mysticism, nationalism, and fuses this with decadent romanticism, decadent Gnostic mythology. The will to power of Nietzsche. That's why the great propaganda film about the Nazis is actually entitled Triumph of the Will. Triumph of the Will. It's being linked to imperialistic racism. Do you see what I'm trying to show you? Nazism is a tsunami of bullshit, in which all of these currents, these that are emerging out of the collapse of the three orders are being spun by Hitler in order to try and give people a brutally powerful response to the exigent intensity of the meaning crisis in Weimar Germany. And Hitler lucks out because that whole socio-cultural process is intensified by the socio-economic collapse of the Great Depression. Which seems to vindicate his Gnostic nightmare. It seems to vindicate his dream of dealing with the collapse of meaning through a mythology of imperialistic, racist, twisted, decadent, romantic Gnosticism that has gathered together the shards of this whole historical process in the place in which they were often originating, which is Germany. So we have now these two great pseudo-religious ideologies Marxism and Nazism. And of course, they are diametrically opposed to each other. Right? And Hitler proposes his history of race against communist proposal of the history of class. And these two pseudo-religious ideologies that both propose a totalitarian ideology infused with mythologies of grasping and driving the kairos of history towards the utopia of the promised land. They meet in the most titanic struggle, to use the term that both Marx and Hitler use, the titanic struggle of the Eastern Front in World War II. You see, the thing about many of us is we tend to understand World War II largely from the perspective of the British or the American or the Canadian viewpoint, because we're British or American or Canadian, right? We forget that the Western Front, while significant, and I do not want to in any way denigrate the tremendous sacrifice that people made or endured on the Western Front, but the Western Front is dwarfed by what's happening on the Eastern Front. In 1943, these two titanic forces and the historical, socio-political, socio-economic forces that they have marshaled, they meet at the Battle of Kursk in 1943 on the Eastern Front. There's nothing like it anywhere else in World War II. There's nothing like it anywhere else in world history. This is the biggest battle ever, literally. This battle involves millions of men, tens of thousands of pieces of equipment, thousands and thousands of tanks, thousands of airplanes. It goes from horizon to horizon. It's brutal and vicious. It somehow there's individual acts of tremendous brutality set within this huge technological machine of mass destruction. The Battle of Kursk ends eventually in a Russian victory. So militarily, it spells the beginning of the end of the Nazi regime and the ascendance of the Soviet Union into the post-World War II military superpower dominating Eastern Europe. So, of course, it has all of that historical significance. But the Battle of Kursk points to, right, the literal, what do I want to say? It's overwhelming. It's literally sort of beyond comprehension in terms of its size and its scope and the depth and the sheer amount of technology and material. This also has an impact. You see, on the genealogy of the meaning crisis. I want to point to what this leads to, and of course, and then I've alluded to the Cold War that comes after it, right? See, this tremendous struggle, right, is of course, it is symptomatic of the meaning crisis. What we have is a fixation at the level of beliefs. Both sides are fixated on belief systems, totalitarian ideologies, and attempts to create secular alternatives to religion, totalitarian systems of ideas that are supposed to explain history, reality, and how we can achieve utopia, how we can recapture the axial legacy. We have the complete politicization of the quest for meaning.
Okay, quick break. So I did rewind it a few extra minutes when we came back in there, but as I
Yeah, it was
mentioned
actually
earlier,
pretty good because we were going on a
Let's get to
spiel.
recap.
But, you know, this stuff's getting closer in time frame and more personal.
Yeah,
So,
so the reality's hitting, and it's good for us to really soak this up and understand it as well as we can.
yeah, so the Bismarck, like I have it written as Bismarck fragmentation. So it's like Germany feeling strong as this little man amongst other competing powers that are beating them down, and their nationalistic, imperialistic paradigm is now being challenged.
Yes.
And they've been destroyed after World War I. You know, at
Yes,
this period of time,
completely
like
decimated.
I don't have words to be able to explain like how this region and these people have been destroyed from this period of time. But it's like, you know, like
So the world and Germany are so deeply traumatized by this war. This was the war to end all wars, right?
well, you know, they called it the Great War. They didn't call it World War
That
I.
was World War II was the war to end all wars. Is that right?
maybe,
Or was
but
the first
the
one,
first
and then,
one
and then
was
people were
the-
pissed because it happened again.
The first one was the Great War.
I think that's right.
It's like,
yeah.
oh, this is the biggest.
And,
it's
and I
ever
think
gonna
it was
be. It's
sold
like-
to us as the war to end all wars kind of thing, and then it happened again.
So there's the collapse of
So yeah,
German
I mean,
idealism.
Germany's deeply traumatized. Collapse of idealism, yes. The dream of imperialism
Yeah, and
as well. We have Luther having
and-
called for
and-
the eradication of Jews, so that's in the mix.
so the collapse of German idealism is because of this idea of positivism and the scientific materialism
Oh, yes.
as well.
Yep.
So like it was like a trifecta of like hitting them all at once. It's like, well, we got science and the math that, you know, is the unchangeable hitting you, but then also like we've got this positive aspect, which is challenging the, you know, at this period of time after Great Plagues and all other things. So, you know, there's this positive aspect that's also changing them. So the Western world east of Germany is all, you know, like, oh, it's positive. It's just positive direction, you know, like, positive flow of, what do you call it? Profit, positive flow of all these different things. And it just kills this Lutheran idea. So we're dealing with idealists who are in this world of everything being destroyed.
Yep.
And
Scientific materialism, the ongoing Protestant Reformation, the will to power, collapse of idealism, then romanticism, then their thwarted nationalistic and imperialistic urges. We have the anti-Semitism growing, becoming a racist interpretation of history to challenge Hegel and Marx's versions, Hegel's idealism and Marx's class ideas.
so the thing that's spun into that is there's still this German romantic idea that's spiraling with this willful nature,
Yep.
but this also self-taught autodidactic nature that's moving in. So now you have people getting together trying to create their own new perverse, even more perverse than the original perverse
versions of the dark Gnosticism, you could say.
Yeah.
And so
And
this
then-
romantic, willful, autodidactic current turns into Hitler.
Yeah, and Mein Kampf is my struggles.
My struggle.
And the clever thing that, at least with that name and perhaps with what Hitler had written for that, I don't think Hitler wrote Mein Kampf. He was a failed painter. But regardless,
Well, Vervaeke did mention that it's really hard to follow just because it's incoherent in the way that he's trying to make his arguments.
well, and it's
And we know Hitler was very often on a lot of methamphetamines, and he had
it may be one of those things. It's also, it's like, don't read it literally, but more read it like
he also had a mentor that deeply influenced his thoughts. I forget the gentleman's name.
Who was the guy
That was
hundreds of years,
friggin' evil.
if not thousands of years before? That's like, we talked about him. He wrote a thing, and if you if you read it literally, you don't get it, but it's basically him self-Socratizing. So this is the equivalent of Hitler's self-Socratizing, but not
Oh, right.
on
Like
his
Marcus Aurelius.
struggles,
Yeah.
but he's trying to embody the struggles of this nation state of the Germans. So it wasn't just his
Yep,
struggles, but
It was everyone's
the struggles of
yeah,
everybody.
yeah.
And of course,
He knew about personalizing it would be a more powerful sell. It's a
Yeah.
clever name.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a powerful sell.
And it was in conflict with the Western ideas at the time
Yes,
as well.
it
So
was,
it's like,
yeah.
because the West was the enemy at that point, they won, and they're exacting hardcore penalties on Germany at this point. So it's like, okay, well, the West, this Western civilization is out to get all of us and just trying to kill all
Yeah.
of us.
His version of
So we
Western
have to bond
civilization he
together.
thinks is the way.
And he brought
Yeah.
in this racist aspect of,
Yep.
well, the Jews ain't part of us. They've got all the money here in Germany, and the West ain't part of us because they're just really doing the biddings of the capitalist bourgeoisie Jews.
Yeah.
And the thing with Hitler, like what makes Hitler's National Socialism
Yeah. The National Socialist Party.
different than communism is like really Hitler thought that like what Marx was getting at was just the bourgeois really trying to take a hold of this revolution that's happening. So what he thought of the communist revolution was, no, that ain't right, because that's just the capitalists trying to control everything just the same. What we have here is this nation of the Germans, the pure blood Germans that are being taken advantage by other people. So we got to look after our genetic whatever heritage. And at this
his
point in
argument
time,
was a race card.
they didn't just mean color race. They meant like, you ain't from here.
Yeah.
You're another
You're not part of our
people's-
nation.
Yeah. And at this point in time in Europe, like everybody
one of us.
is white. So we're not talking about color racism. We're talking about races. Of
Oh
like,
yeah, no, like Germans are superior to the French people and to the so on
yeah,
and so
and the
forth,
only
yeah.
reason why we can't succeed is because we've been screwed over by the West. Doesn't that sound familiar? Just replace West with whatever buzzword you want to replace.
Yeah, really.
The only reason why we can't succeed is because other buzzword. Now, who are the Nazis? And also fascist. I'm going to clear this up real quick, and people are going to really hate me for this, but Hitler was not a fascist. Hitler was a National Socialist. The Nazis were the National Socialist Workers' Party of Germany. They were National Socialists. They were not fascists.
You can be socialist and fascist, which Hitler
Sure.
proved, but he's like fascist compared to Mussolini.
He saw fascism and he saw communism as like, no, I'm going to make a better way. So outside
his
of that,
fascism was different than
was based
Mussolini's,
off
but it
of
was
race.
it's
Well,
definitely a fascism still. But definitely, you're right about the
Hey.
socialism aspect, which we shouldn't forget. That happened in both
Yeah. Well, with
the Soviet Union and
the
Germany.
difference between like say
two different versions of
Mussolini
it.
and Hitler, though, like
Yeah,
so
yeah,
so Mussolini had citizens that were Jews, but they served in the military and they were still the high echelon. That end cared less about race. Hitler's end of it was like, no, you got to be a part of this master race. And he had people who were Jews for whatever, whether religious or genetically, that were part of his group of people, but were never seen the same. They were just useful idiots in order to propagate his thing. He thought he was above and better than
yeah.
communism, Marxist communism, and Mussolini's fascism. It's different. So
And
it's like-
democracy. Yeah.
so it is right to say that Nazism is very racist as its core. Its core is based on national racism.
Absolutely.
Not color
Yeah.
racism,
Yeah.
which color comes into it, because like if you're from like Africa, of course you're not like
Right,
Aryan,
right.
you know, like whatever Hitler thought was prime, but it was like the idea of race as not color, but this national state identity of peoples within this tribe of peoples, that we can write this correct history, that if, and it's socialism, the correct history, if you know the correct history.
Ah, yes,
That's
yes.
this whole thing. It's like he thought that, like only the Aryans could create sophisticated advanced civilizations. That's why he went to like India and stuff like that, and like got the Buddhist symbols, is because they created advanced civilizations.
And then he
So
twisted them,
They
though.
must be Aryan,
took their
because
symbol
only
for-
Aryans could be.
He took the symbol for peace, love, and unity,
yeah.
and he turned it.
Well, he flipped it.
He flipped
and
it
turned it
and
on
turned
its
it
side. Yeah. Oh
to-
yeah.
I guess, harness the opposite power. I don't know, man. That's dark, though.
Yeah, I'm not going to even go into that end.
And the occultism that is beneath the Nazi movement, but even Vervaeke doesn't touch that, and that's a whole other podcast itself.
The idea of the correct interpretation of history, though.
He's right, though. It's certainly not just a political movement. So Hitler is like Luther in that he sees his own personal struggle as emblematic of all of Germany and Western civilization. He articulates his own weird mythology in such a way to say that, and this weird mythology is so much more than fascism and racism, which are in service to a Gnostic nightmare. The idea of being trapped, and that to find our way out is...
Yeah. And yeah, that's the descent into because of our attachments to the pseudo-religious ideologies.
Yes, and the decadent romanticism of it. So there's this idea, we're a master race trapped in a worldwide conspiracy, and only by thwarting these evil overlords can we possibly experience the grace and the promised land that we seek.
And that's the triumph of will.
This is
if we
just
have
another
the will.
Yeah, pseudo-religious ideology. This is what happens when secularism tries to use the religious way of uniting people.
Yeah.
It just doesn't work without having the sacred involved. It turns to shit. It turns to violence.
Yeah, it's the example of imperialistic racism, which is the tsunami of bullshit.
Mm-hmm. In Hitler's personal mythology, the way he exemplifies it, it's very attractive to people at this time in Germany. And as we said, Nazism, not just a political movement, it's a pseudo-religious ideology, imperialistic racism, the tsunami of BS, all of these events, or all of these currents from the collapse of order previously are being sewn together by Hitler to give a brutal response. And then the Great Depression here in the West, it seems to vindicate Hitler. So now Marxism and Nazism are diametrically opposed, but they're both wrong. It's class versus race, both proposing totalitarian ideologies, totalitarian systems as answers that are going to drive us towards the utopia.
Yeah, so Hitler gave us the answer to this external collapse of Western fundamentals. Mm-hmm. It's like, okay, it's collapsing, it's not working anymore, so I'm going to give you an answer, which was a nationalistic, imperialistic, racist... twisted Gnosticism, twisted decadent Gnosticism. Not just twisted, but something that's prone to decay, that won't last because it's just going to rot. Mm-hmm. Whether or not Hitler or whoever came up with whatever realized it, but it's going to rot. So
So Marxism and Nazism, diametrically opposed, but both wrong. One class ideology, one race ideology, both proposing totalitarian solutions.
The class ideology is Marxism, and the race ideology is Nazism. Just to clear it up.
They meet in what they both term the Titanic struggle
of the Eastern Front.
Yes. And in the West, we know a little bit about the Western Front. We don't know so much about the Eastern Front. Vervaeke is right. The Western Front was huge and significant. The Eastern Front dwarfed it. It was the largest battle in human history.
So the Battle of Kursk.
Millions.
1943. Ain't so far long ago. This is less than 100 years ago.
Horizon to horizon for miles. Millions of men. Tens of thousands of pieces of equipment.
And
tanks,
many of
planes.
them dead.
Yes. Russian victory in this battle marks the ascendance of the Soviet Union and the attempt to create secular alternatives, totalitarian systems to achieve some kind of utopia that continues on,
and then the war went cold. We stopped fighting with lead and explosives, and we started fighting with ideas and ideals.
Somehow, even after the war, even after this World War, the Soviet Union manages to kill how many people? 100 million? I don't know exactly how many, but it was...
I've heard between 100 and 200 million, but that's over 90 million.
Around the same number as Germany.
That's over 100 million.
Once you include China and Korea,
Cambodia,
other countries
Korea. You want to talk about South America?
Then I'm
you
pretty sure you passed
Cuba,
Germany's
you want to,
Third Reich numbers. Yeah.
Oh no, frankly, the amount of people that so the amount of people that Hitler killed was a lot. Within a short period of time.
Horrifyingly a lot.
Communism has killed way more. It just took longer.
Yeah.
So do you want it fast or do you want it slow? You want the slow drip IV, or do you want the thing shoved
I would
right up your
prefer
butt?
neither.
Yeah,
Yeah.
precisely. I'd rather stay healthy and die in my own time.
Yeah.
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 But
So let's not rush to judgment and rush to solution making with our ideologies.
So this Cold War that we ended up being in, like after dealing with fascism, communism, and National Socialism, these were the alternatives to the secular religion.
Yes.
You know, so it's like we're still dealing with the remnants of that secular religious alternative that we have for religion.
The previous
and
wisdom schools
schoolings,
and yeah.
yes. And you know, we waged war with that within the Cold War. You know, it's like we're still going through Cold Wars throughout the nation. You can't call them hot wars. We have hot wars where we drop bombs, but you know, information is the deadliest weapon ever.
No, and they're still fighting, and there's still war going on during Cold Wars. It's just that we're using proxies to fight through.
Our frenemies will sit on the same side of the table while we watch other people die for us, right?
Yeah, that too.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. So I think that catches us
Yeah.
up. I'm gonna jump back in here, guys.
Secular alternative to religion. That's what you get when you deny religion too heavily. Critique religion all you want, but like there's a reason for it. And if we replace it with
And the process of enlightenment, the practices, the methodologies,
that's what religion should help you with,
the
right?
techniques
Like ascension.
that allow us
Yeah.
to experience that ascension process, we are
Personally
finding are
and
crucial.
publicly, yeah.
They are crucial. Yeah, you can't lose the sense of the sacred. You lose the sense of the sacred, and it
At
gets
your
bad.
own risk, right?
Yeah.
Replace
dark
it
very
at your
quickly.
own risk.
All right, guys, so we're going to jump back in here now. Let's do it. I'm going to rewind him a little bit again just to make sure we know where we are at.
They'll catch us up. This is kind of a celebration for me.
we
It's
have-
the 25th episode. I'm just happy that we got this far.
Me too.
Utopia. How we can recapture the axial legacy. We have
Okay.
the complete politicization of the quest for meaning. Mythology is being confused with politics. Confused with politics in powerful ways. The perspectival knowing has been reduced to your political viewpoint. The participatory knowing has been reduced to your political identification. And it marshals tremendous physical resources in a titanic struggle of wills, confrontation of ideologies. Now, what does all of that legacy mean for us? Because, of course, eventually the Soviet Union also collapses. Well, this whole secularized political process of the pseudo-religious ideologies is not only symptomatic of the meaning crisis, it also contributes to the meaning crisis. It's not just a result, it causally feeds back into exacerbating the meaning crisis. Okay, how? Well, we face, right, the meta crisis. Thomas Bjorklund has called it that and talked about it. You know, this is the intertwining, ecological, socioeconomic, and spiritual crises, existential crises of our time, the mental health crises, etc. Now, the meta crisis, right, in which the meaning crisis plays a significant role, interdependent with.
Sorry about that. I want to pull that back a little bit because he just gave us a great definition of the meaning crisis, which is what this whole series is about.
Ecological, socioeconomic, and spiritual crises, existential crises of our time, the mental health crises, etc.
Yes. There we go.
Now, the meta crisis, right, in which the meaning crisis plays a significant role, how it's interdependent with these other crises.
And metacrisis would be the term for the myriad, various existential, as in potentially life-ending or species-ending crises that our species now faces. The meaning crisis being rooted within the metacrisis
And yeah, the meta being the overarching as well.
Yes.
So there may be many crises within the meta crisis.
Crises, I like that.
I think that's how you pronounce it.
Crises, I think it's just crises, but it's it's weird how you spell crisis and crises though, because crisis is CRISIS, but crises is CRISES. And normally we use two E's or something, or IE or something when we're doing an E sound.
I don't know. I'm a drummer.
English is
I'm
so
a drummer and a bass
confusing, man.
player. I just show up and do the thing. That's just what I do.
I like that. I like that excuse. I'm a lyricist. Am I supposed to know stuff?
It means you have like 5 different words for each word.
That's it.
Yeah.
Yeah, unfortunately, but I can't remember half of them.
Yeah, man. Well, that's ADD.
All right. Yeah. All right. So we're going back in now, guys.
To address this is going to require comprehensive. We have to have comprehensive change in our consciousness, our cognition, because I've shown you the deep history of all of this. We have to have a comprehensive change in our consciousness, our cognition, our character. How we cultivate virtue, wisdom, compassion, self-transcendence, our culture, how our communities structure distributed cognition together, create systematic psychotechnologies. Now, the only thing that in the past that has created systematic sets of psychotechnologies that transform cognition, consciousness, character, and culture in an interdependent way is religion. That's the only thing that we've created that does this. Now, in the 19th and the 20th century, we tried to create alternatives to this. The pseudo-religious ideologies that have drenched the world in blood. So what do? We need to respond to the meta-crisis. But we have been traumatized by, the pseudo-religious ideologies. So that no longer seems like a viable option. One thing, of course, that some people are pursuing is a nostalgic attempt to return to religion. An attempt to ignore all of this history. And of course, this leads to various kinds of fundamentalisms. And I do include certain forms of atheism as being pseudo-religious fundamentalisms. Read Chris Hedges' book on this. I think he makes a good case for it. This, of course, can interact with how everything has been politicized. There we go. When those interact, of course, we get the potential for terrorism. And so many people rightly are very doubtful of this as a response. Many people find themselves stuck here. They're post-religious. They reject this, but they also reject this, the pseudo-religious ideologies. They're post-religious, and they find themselves, as we said, fragmented, autodidactic. And these responses, of course, dangerously interact with this, facilitated by things like social media and the internet. Also dangerously interact with these pseudo-religious ideologies. See, what I'm showing you here is we seem to need a religion that cannot be any kind of religion at all. We seem to need a religion that cannot be any kind of religion at all. We can't deal with the meaning crisis by pursuing pseudo-religious ideologies, trying to deal with this as a political issue. This is why I steadfastly refuse to build an argument for this work that I'm trying to share with you as on the back of a political controversy, as a confrontation of political ideologies. Trying to frame or understand the meaning crisis as a struggle between political ideologies, as a political thing, as a political process of using violence, potentially, or argument to change belief, is to misrepresent the meaning crisis. There is no political solution to our troubled evolution, to quote the police. We somehow need a religion that is not a religion at all. We need a God beyond all gods. For many people, this seems, I think, reasonably enough, to be a dilemma, to be a contradiction. And we are not just being stuck on the horns of a dilemma, we are being gored and ripped apart by the horns of the dilemma. So the clash, the adversarial clash of pseudo-religious ideologies is not only symptomatic of the meaning crisis, it contributes to the meaning crisis by locking us into, or at least contributing to the way in which we are locked into this dilemma, this aspect of the meaning crisis in which we need a religion that is not a religion at all.
We continue on. Do one last quick stop here. So participatory knowing is basically reduced to political identification.
So yeah, the confusing
by Marx,
the confusing of our mythology with politics.
Mm-hmm. That's it. Yeah. Yeah.
Or if you want to say politics, you can call it identities, like, you know, or we're confusing the myth with the identity of ourself.
Yeah.
If we're telling a story and you're in the story yourself, which, you know, makes sense. Politics is mostly about identity anymore. You know, you're left, you're right, you're red, you're blue, you're jackass versus elephant, you're Democrat versus Republican, you're
it's another title for
progressive versus
ego wardrobe.
Yeah.
You know?
So there's the identity as opposed to the mythology. It's like, okay, well, the mythology would have a story about, say, like a conservative jackass riding upon an elephant into the green space of the future, and then you'd have to like decode something deep within that instead of saying, well, I'm going to identify as the elephant the guy's riding upon, and this whole story is from the view of the elephant being ridden on, and it's like, well, the other person's like, well, I'm the jackass at the, you know, it's just like, so there's this confusion, like the myth is a story that encodes wisdom through virtuous attributes, right?
Yes.
So to confuse the mythology with the politics, what's the politics? The politics is, well, the polis, where everybody goes, the things that happen within where everybody goes.
That affects all the population. Yep.
So would you rather identify with a good story, which we tend to do? You know, it's like, oh, my town. Let me tell you about some stories from my town. Welcome to my town. Let me tell you all the stories from there.
Or with a political affiliation.
Yeah, and when you talk politics, the story stops real quick.
Yeah.
So like, so this is quite the blunder.
Yeah.
Confusing
Your stories
the
only
two.
work in your party when you come from the political angle.
Yeah, yeah, opposed to the overall. So this
Doesn't account for the individual very well, and for variance amongst individuals very well.
well, of course not, because like if politics is about having a limited number of variants, whereas the myth is like every story or everything within the myth, whether it be person or setting,
It's meant to cover. It's like an every man or an every woman.
and meant to cover many things
Yes.
all at once,
Yes,
yet
yes.
nothing all
and
at
work
once.
perennially, so over time you can still
Yeah.
tell this story centuries later and it still works.
So that's a great blunder.
Yeah, because
in and of itself.
religion was the only thing that helped us raise consciousness, improve cognition, character, and our culture.
And how dare we try to replace it
Well,
with something else?
That's what we've been trying to do.
Yeah.
And we tried in the 1900s to create alternatives in our more recent history, and we see that we drenched the world in blood doing so. So the meta-crisis, this idea of, it's a term for the many myriad existential crises that face our species.
Yeah.
The meaning crisis is at the root of the meta-crisis. And in the meaning crisis, we find ourselves having recently been traumatized by these pseudo-religious ideologies now in the 1900s. And so we're getting this nostalgic return to
or attempting
attempts at
to
religion.
return through nostalgia.
Yes. Oh, you're right. Yes,
Yeah,
through
yeah.
nostalgia.
We're
to
trying.
religion.
We're trying to
But
return.
it's just the wrong way. You got to do it through virtue. You got to do it through the way. You can't
Yeah,
do it through nostalgia, like wishfulness.
But the alternative to
wanting.
that is this fundamentalism. So let's look at the rules and then adhere to what we interpret as the rules as tightly as we can.
Just
Burn
what it
all the
says,
witches,
believe it, believe
you
it,
know,
believe it.
like, yeah.
And
And then what do you do?
what
You get the
believe.
burning of the
And that's
witches.
religion.
You get the terrorism where you terrorize
yes.
people because
Yes.
my God's better than your God. Well, we
get the
forgot
holy
about
wars.
God. Well, I adhere more to the rules that I read on some piece of paper or on the wall, and that's right. So that's right. And if you don't believe me, well, I'm going to take you out
dude.
and torture you
If y'all
for
thought forgetting about Dre was bad, we forgot about God. And as Nietzsche said, we will never be finished cleaning up the blood. Right, figuratively.
or
I
there's,
hope that
there's not
eventually we are
enough water
finished
in all
cleaning
the
up the blood.
oceans to clean up the
clean up
blood, or
that was
like,
the-
you know,
that
however
was
you
the-
want
that's
to.
it. Yeah, something like that. Actually, is more along the lines.
And well, a rejection of religion too, because how dare the tradition of the religion tell you what you should do? Like, you know, we're talking about a Protestant era here.
Yep.
So
yep.
you're like still rebelling
Still in
against
the midst of
tradition
that
at this point. You're still
revolution.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So
So
the
post-
nostalgic return to religion creates fundamentalism, and then that fundamentalism can turn into excessive politicization.
That thing.
Hold on.
That thing that
That
we can't
thing
say.
that I just say?
Yeah, you know.
Yes, fundamentalism turns into politicization. I'm adding an extra
To
is.
politicize.
Yes. Well,
Yes, it has been politicized. These fundamental rules.
Politicization. There really is that many is or beers in there.
So basically, it's brought into the polis where everybody gets together and talks
Yes.
about
And
things.
this
So
is
it
an
has become the
yeah.
center of where everybody goes.
Yes.
Very important.
So everything's being politicized, and then it becomes terrorism. Excess politicization becomes terrorism.
Well, yeah, because if you
That
don't,
is such a weird
if you
word.
don't share the same center area, the same polis that I do, I'm either going to force you to share it, or I'm going to destroy yours. I'm going to rain terror upon you. Of course.
Oh, I just had it in my head. Damn it. I'm still trying to understand where.
Which is ultimately a rejection of the religion. It's because
Yes.
it's like, you know, like, well,
Yes.
we're also like at the end of this, we're not taking the old way, because the old way that's old and stale, and I'm seeing all these practices through these nostalgic glasses, rewriting it. And if you don't agree with me, you're challenging it. It's no longer comfortable.
Yeah.
Times are as tough as they are.
Yeah.
I don't need your crap. Get out of here. Oh, you don't want to get out of here? No, I'm already out of here. No, you're not out of here. My line's all the way over there.
Yeah.
I thought your line was there. No. Oh,
You're still in my line, buddy.
those glasses, they tend to make things a little further closer. And
Oh,
you just
boy.
can't tell.
So, that
Sorry, I went on my
nostalgic
soapbox.
attempt to return to religion
Yeah.
turns into postmodernism. We get this post-religious, fragmented, autodidactic world where we're not learning together anymore, so that we can like catch ourselves in errors as easily, of misunderstanding.
So,
And we're dangerously attracted to pseudo-religious ideologies.
yeah, I'm going to take us to the word autodidact. So if you're just joining us on the episode, autodidact is like somebody who teaches themselves.
Self-learning. Yep.
So when you have an autodidact learning, when you see other people, it's like you could take it from the end of like, well, you're not seeing the people who have learned it before you that can teach you. Mm-hmm. So there's a kind of a rejection to that. Yeah, it's like, no,
they can
screw
help you
that.
with the pitfalls,
I don't
the
need to know.
misunderstandings,
I don't
the
need to know. I got it
misapplications.
for myself. Now apply
That's the
that to-
danger of autodidactism. Yes.
So, and with that in mind, as we're moving on to this, but autodidact
That's
is
a really
the
good
word.
point, man. And I've been very much an autodidact all of my life, and I see the danger that he's pointing out there.
But
without the fellowship and the feedback.
Well, you hang out with the old fogies that are just the others and whatever in the group, and actually, if you listen, we
think better together. Yeah, we collectively sense make, and we pick up where each other leave off, when we fill in each other's gaps, and we find each other's mistakes, and that's ideal, man. That's awesome. So there's no political solution, as Sting once saying.
It's
no
ideologies battling
to our
ideologies.
troubled evolution. Yes, it's ideologies battling ideologies.
Yeah. There's no polite solution. It's just,
no polite solution.
It's just Ido versus Ido, and then you get confused to which Ido is which Ido, and then you're like, it's Ido fighting Ido, and you're like, oh, Ido, hi Ido, hi.
Ido don't know.
Yeah, that's what my notes.
That sounds
look
like a good cartoon.
Ido versus Ido belief, misinterpretation of meaning. With your beliefs. If okay, so Ido versus Ido is like, so you started the match, you bring your own Ido, right? And he's going to fight another Ido.
Okay.
Ideology. So we're going to call Ido.
Ido.
And then the other person puts their ideology Ido, but they're both labeled Ido. They're exactly the same shaped. Mm-hmm. And at first you're tracking your one because you taught it how to throw some punches and it's about to, but once it what it will do because you've trained it so it defends in certain ways, you're like, oh yeah, that's my one. But as the progression goes on, they kind of like start merging and learning. And then you can't tell Ido from Ido. And you just have a belief that it's like, oh, that one. Yeah, that one's mine. Like, they both have red belt and, I'm imagining little, pastry puff people.
That's funny, dude. That's so true. That's because that's what people do.
Well,
that's why people stay the same party but don't notice that the parties are changing. Well, my grandmother
and also
told me, I've seen this flip happen a couple times between the Democrats and Republicans. They switch sides, yeah.
Well, and even
she's 93.
The Puritan Christians from the 90s, well, the far leftists are sounding exactly the same, just change a few words, and it's the same Ido beating the shit out of the other Ido. But you say, this one's mine, even though the other may have put it in the ring, or maybe you put it in there first, but it gets quite confusing, and we're misinterpreting the meaning. Yeah. So why are they in there fighting, first of all? Mm-hmm.
That's a good question, too. Because we think that they need to fight to be able, so that the one that survives is the one that is like the winner, basically. And we forget that you can allow them to healthfully merge.
Well, let's call this fight the crisis, right?
So I like the idea of the ideas fighting. That seems healthy as long as we can do it when they're just ideas.
That's
why it's so good to have free speech. Free speech is so important, because if you get rid of free speech, if you take away the things because even if it's a really bad thing, let that bad person say it so that they can be called out in front of everybody. In the public arena.
Yeah,
and their ideas can be argued against
called out
in front of everybody, so you can see
the
deleteriousness and blah blah blah.
Allow the idea to be fleshed out in the polis where everybody meets, so they can take it home into the not polis where the individual is. Mm-hmm.
Because conversation, it's the last alternative to violence.
Well, perhaps conversation would have been a good shoehorn or stopping, not a shoehorn that helps, but maybe a wedge in this period of time where we've Idos versus Idos. The crisis is between where we go together, so the polis and the not polis. So like a bad idea, take it to where everybody is. Sorry. and then you hash it out, and then you bring it into the place where everybody isn't.
Yes.
Which is the not polis, which would be, the family, the home, the self,
The workplace. Yep.
the mind behind the mind behind the mind, where I hope the
Yes.
best sticks.
Yes.
And so this period of time where we're at, what we're discussing right now, is there's this crisis between the political and the non-political.
Yes.
But we're still trying to solve this need for God.
And this
While there's
political,
a
non-political
conflict
modes of solution.
between political, public and personal,
Yes.
on top of ideologies fighting each other, on
Yes.
top of really bad times happening,
Yeah.
and victim mentality on top of all that,
Immense suffering, Great Depression,
It's
2 world wars in a row. Yeah.
it's getting easier to see the little things that build up for the avalanche, like as we go with this, and these are like,
And you can see the stones that we flipped over in recent history.
and at least on my end, this is just my interpretation as we're going through. I'm treating this as if I was going to like a called lecture and we're taking notes. So I might be wrong. Put it in the comments if you think I'm onto something, or if you think I'm not onto something, or if you have a continuation.
Yeah, we're sense making together here, guys.
Well,
It's not a competition
the best way to fight against fascism,
against anything but our
national
extinction.
socialism, all this other stuff, as well as bad tribalism and consumerism and all that stuff. Talk about it, learn together,
Yep.
keep going,
Yep.
find a better solution, and delight in the fact
Put
that
our
we're
heads
all
together.
kind of messed up and we
Yeah,
have our
we're all
stuff together.
imperfect, But together we can figure out more complex things than we can figure out on our own, that is for sure.
The dilemma. We need the
dilemma.
dilemma. Yes, let's continue the dilemma, but in a way that's not killing people. So let's talk about the dilemma. We're in a dilemma. It's got horns and it wants to gore you.
That's right, yeah.
That's
Bored
the
and ripped
dilemma.
apart
You
by the
need-
dilemma of pseudo-religious ideologies that contribute and add to the meaning crisis. Now exacerbate the meaning crisis of today.
And one of the biggest ones is like the need for God. So it's like whether you believe in God or not, there is this weird instinctual need for this
There's
concept of
a
needing
religious
God.
hole in people's lives, yeah. And by religion, I mean in the deepest sense of that word is like in coming together in celebration of union.
Yeah. So yeah,
in the transcendent source. Fellowship in that. Fellowship on the source of love and life and existence and blah, blah, blah. Let's get back into it, guys, before I go on.
And real quick, the need for, or going through this political, non-political, so everybody else in self, as well as so the dilemma of needing God, as well as the dilemma between self and others, is at the core of our meaning crisis.
Yes.
I didn't describe it too well, but like
It's within us in our relationships.
and the dilemma, regardless of the dilemma, I'm starting to notice is like there is always this dilemma that then gives the urge to move further.
I could talk about
Yes.
works of literature.
Sorry, I didn't mean for him to start playing there. I meant
Oh
to
no, I'm just waxing poetic and going on.
do some rewinding
We're halfway
while you're
through.
finished.
I'm celebrating, and I'm running off of fumes, so I'm just kind of like, ooh,
Yeah, we're almost there now, guys. So we're going to watch the last, what is this, like 17 and a half-ish minutes here and wind it up, guys.
Hit us up in the comments section.
Indeed, yeah, join the conversation. Help us figure this out. We can't do this on our own. That's why I'm sharing this live to hopefully encourage more people out there to join us in this process of realization. I mean, I haven't found any answer besides changing the world from the inside out and doing so together in methods of fellowship and ways of fellowship that we can share and help propagate and popularize and let's describe God together. Let's describe this way together. We have a lot of the legwork is already done for us by amazing masters.
How many thousands of years
all
worth
over the
of,
world?
it's
Yeah,
like,
thousands of years
you
of work
just
is
gotta
already
get
done.
in on the conversation.
Yeah,
man.
and there's so many angles covered on the infinite, transcendent nature of the divine that the humans have a great map to explore the sacred. So let's start allowing our religious systems and wisdom traditions and philosophies to come into conversation and mingle.
Hey,
Get to know one another.
It's more fun than not doing it. So
Because it's
like,
literally
come
just
on.
God talking to itself. It's like this whole thing, all of these religions are nothing but this one thing that we are trying to describe. It's literally just this one thing. We know there's something, or those of us that you could say believe know there's something. But we do know we're here, and we do know we exist in the midst of some kind of miraculous cosmos that goes on further than we can possibly measure, and we don't know how the hell the damn thing begins. So we're in the midst of a miracle. It's a great mystery. Might as well capitalize that G and that M, so that you have something to be reverent towards, something to have some sense of wonder towards, some grasp, some handhold on something sacred, so that you can see the beauty, that transcendent beauty that is in every little thing. It's in every moment. It's available to us always. And from there, I think we might be able to start.
Well, hey,
exploring
it's
a
way
new way.
cooler than not doing it. So you want to be a cool kid?
All right.
I don't know. Peer pressure.
That technique works too sometimes. Yeah. Well, it's funny because for me, finding people like Vervaeke and recognizing this natural authenticity, real care, real heart, somebody that is genuine and being true and is acting in good faith, it's just a breath of fresh air. And I don't have to agree with Vervaeke on 100% of everything, but I do know that his intentionality is aimed in the right direction. The orientation of unconditionality that he has taken on here as he looks at all of these various ways that humans have tried to make meaning of reality. And he holds them all up for us to see on an equal level so we can understand how they interacted over time and how we got to where we are, trying to keep too much of the ideological bent out of it and the spin out of it, and just say, frankly, this is what happened, this is where we're at. The guy comes across from himself a pretty secular scientific angle, but he is arguing for the sacred. Well, he's realizing that there's something that we've missed here.
He can't help but interpret within his own lens, but I think what he's doing with this is he's trying not to interpret within the lenses of morality.
He's keeping it as open as he can for us.
Yeah. Because he grew up
He's not
in
being
a certain
too certain.
Environment. He went to school in a certain environment.
Yes.
He follows a certain field. His brain works a certain way.
Yes.
Of course, he's going to have his own shadow
But
to cast
he's
upon it.
done enough reflection to be aware of that.
But I haven't seen
that.
anything moralistic.
No.
Like even when he's talking about freaking Hitler and Marx and, so, the proof of the pudding is in the tasting.
Mm-hmm.
I have tasted this pudding and it seems pretty honest. So we'll continue watching. And even if you don't want to watch us, continue with this and go find other people who do stuff like this.
Or engage with the people that are debating over Vervaeke if you want. I mean, this is
even,
a real
even
conversation
debate
that's
over
happening.
Vervaeke.
Yeah.
If you think this stuff is wrong and what he's talking about is wrong, then debate him.
Okay, let's
The
come up with a
worst
better
thing
idea.
That could happen is we can make this better.
Yes. Yeah, right. That's it, man. That's it. So
Like, for real.
this is the conversation, and this is the one that we become involved in if we want to be the stewards of this planet that the world needs in order for us to hopefully ensure some level of peacefulness and security in the future for those that come after us and the little ones that exist today. It seems like a good goal. Seems like a responsible thing to do, and I'm able to respond, so why not?
Yeah, if you're able to respond, then you're
Responsible.
Responsible.
That's the name of the game. Well, it feels good, too. If you're ignoring what needs to be responded to, it gets worse.
Well, one of the
We
worst.
become anxiety-ridden. We got to face the monsters.
One of the worst things you can do to somebody is take away their responsibilities. That's a punishment within
Isn't
itself.
it? Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
All right,
Great
guys.
school stuff, man.
We're going to jump back in here. Let's go.
So, I could continue on this history. I could talk about great works of literature that struggle with this dilemma. I think a fruitful way of understanding one of the great novels, I consider it one of the greatest and certainly one of my favorite, Moby Dick is about this dilemma. I think you could make a good case for that. You could talk about different aspects of popular culture. You could see the zombie mythology as an articulation of this and aspects of the meaning crisis. But we'll come back to that. Because it's now time to move from the historical analysis, from understanding the genealogy, the collapse of the three orders, the nomological, the normative, and the narrative. The dilemma that emerges out of the attempt to deal with the collapse through the creation of pseudo-religious ideologies. It's time to pass from that historical analysis, because we could continue it. We could carry it, like I said, into an analysis of popular culture, important works of art and literature. We could talk about Dostoevsky, or, as I've mentioned, Melville or Conrad. And that of course, is not in any way an exhaustive list. Right? But it's time, I think, now to turn to the other side of the argument that we need to make. We need to turn now to not a historical analysis of the genealogy of the meaning crisis, but a cognitive scientific analysis of the machinery, the cognitive machinery of meaning making itself. Because if we want to respond, awaken from the meaning crisis in a way that does not enmesh us inexorably in this dilemma, that gives us a way of recovering the axial legacy without trying to do that through utopic totalitarian ideologies, I propose that what we do is try to understand, using our best science, the machinery of meaning making, and use that as a way of trying to build a theoretical structure for recovering and salvaging what we can of the axial legacy. And hopefully that science of cognition, that cognitive science, will also afford the engineering of new systematic sets of psychotechnologies, practices of self-transcendence that can be coordinated with the science, such that we are not just talking about responding to the meaning crisis and the historical forces therein. We are affording and providing people with the means to begin the process, individually and hopefully collectively, of creating systematic sets of psychotechnologies that bring back the connectedness lost in the three orders, and bring back the sapiential pursuit of self-transcendence. So, the way to begin that is to just talk about what cognitive science is. And of course, I mean, I'm a cognitive scientist. I teach cognitive science at the University of Toronto. I teach the introduction to cognitive science. I teach many courses. I teach a course on Buddhism and cognitive science. Some of you may know about that. I teach upper level courses on the cognitive science of consciousness. And I teach also cognitive psychology, where I do a lot of work on this machinery of meaning making and the machinery, the cognitive machinery at work in wisdom and self-transcendence. So what I want to do is present to you, I mean, I'm laughing because I have entire university courses in which I do this, but I want to try and present to you or introduce to you what is cognitive science, a particular vision of cognitive science, because of course academics will disagree as to what cognitive science is, and I'm going to present what cognitive science is for me, not in terms of my personal proclivities or tastes, but my argument for what I think is the best vision of what cognitive science should and can be doing. And I want to present that in a way that is deeply interrelated with the meaning crisis. Okay, so cognitive science is a fairly recent discipline. It really emerges only in the late 70s as an explicit academic discipline, the early 80s. And it's born out of an important idea, right? That we actually have multiple disciplines that are studying this thing called mind, the organ of cognition. So, for example, there are some people, let's organize this way. We can talk about sort of levels of reality or levels of analysis, right, to keep Kant happy, right? And then we can talk about different disciplines. Okay. All dealing with this phenomena. And I want to show you how, as the science is advancing, it's also contributing to the meaning crisis in the way it's fragmenting the sense of mind and attendant senses of identity and self. So what do I mean? So you have, right, the understanding of mind by understanding the brain. And people should be more careful when they criticize this. The brain is a terrifically complex and sophisticated thing. But what you do here is you're going to try and understand the mind by studying the brain, studying patterns of neural activity. And of course, the discipline that studies this is neuroscience. And right, they talk about entities like neurons, neuroscience. They talk about neurons, neural processes. They use, fMRIs, perhaps EEG, right? New technologies for observing the brain's behavior. But of course, there's another discipline that is talking about the mind, cognition, at a different level. This is where you try to understand the mind in terms of information processing. Right? And here you're not so much talking about neurons. You might be talking about neural networks, but you're talking more about programs, algorithms. You're talking about ways in which we could potentially make artificial intelligence. Because computers and neural networks aren't made of neurons. They're made, right, out of different kinds of matter. And so we're not talking about the brain level now. We're talking about information processing. And, this is sort of computer science, but especially in the project of artificial intelligence, especially, and we'll talk about what this means later, artificial general intelligence, where what I'm trying to do is not just make machines that can do sort of sophisticated things, but I'm trying to make machines that actually are cognitive agents. And we're going to talk a lot about AI. And of course, we know that AI has the potential to radically transform our self-understanding and exacerbate the meaning crisis. And it is doing so already. But of course, another way I study your mind is I study your behavior. Now, notice here I'm talking about, what do I do here? I don't cut up brains and slice them under microscopes or run fMRIs. I make simulations. I actually create programs or neural networks or various combinations. So notice what I'm showing you. Each discipline is directed to a different level, and it's using different language, and it's using different methods of investigation, and it's amassing different kinds of evidence. So what's the discipline that studies behavior? Well, of course, that's psychology, a discipline that I'm privileged to practice at the University of Toronto. And we talk about different things. I mean, psychologists sometimes talk about brains, and they sometimes talk about this because cognitive psychology is very influenced by cognitive science. But generally, psychologists are trying to understand behavior. And we talk about things like working memory and long-term memory. Right? We talk about those kinds of things, and what we do is we use experimentation on human beings, and we gather statistical data, demographic data, etc., and we try to understand. So again, a different level, using different language, different methods, and different kinds of evidence. Is that enough? No, there's another discipline that talks about mind. Because of what I'm doing right now, I'm making noises come out of my face hole, and you understand my mind. Language. Language seems to be a really important way in which mind operates and mind communicates. It's through language that minds are linked together. And so you get language here. And this, of course, is studied by linguistics. And here you don't talk about working memory and long-term memory. You might if you link them together in psycholinguistics. And notice how there's this constant wanting to link the levels together in these new hybrid disciplines. But generally in linguistics, you talk about things like tree structures, you talk about transformational grammar. You do something like experiments, but it's more right where you're testing people's judgments about whether or not a certain utterance is grammatically acceptable, makes sense. So again, different level, different language, different methods, different kinds of evidence. And as I've said before, long before the internet networked computers together, culture was networking minds together, because most of our problem solving is done with distributed cognition. And the discipline that studies that, of course, is anthropology. And anthropology uses a different method. It uses participant observation, because listen to that language, because culture is something you have to know in a participatory knowing fashion. You have to go through the transformation of enculturation to know what a culture is. It uses participant observation. It generates ethnography. So what am I showing you? I'm showing you, right, that this term doesn't refer in a univocal fashion. It's equivocal. When I'm saying mind, it's not clear what I mean. Science is fragmenting what the word mind means, and therefore it's fragmenting you, who and what you are. Now here's the idea, right? We have a problem here. We'll come back about this. If we don't get clear about how we can integrate these various different meanings of mind, we're going to engage in lots of equivocation. I'll come back and talk about that. But here's the other idea. It's highly unlikely, and already we've seen that these different disciplines want a hybrid together. It's highly unlikely that these various levels are not causally impacting and constraining each other. In fact, it's highly plausible that these various levels causally interpenetrate and deeply influence each other. So we need to capture the causal interaction between the levels. How do we capture this causal interaction that is not being captured by any one of the individual disciplines? Well, we follow that impulse to hybridization, but we pursue something more. What we want to do is we want to get all of these disciplines talking to each other, not in an equivocal fashion, but in a meaningful fashion, talking to each other. We want a kind of theoretical integration, because that integration of these different languages and ontologies for each one of these disciplines is how we're going to capture the missing causal interaction between the levels and avoid equivocating. And it also holds this potential, because if we can get a discipline that does that, then we will also not only have a theoretical scientific advance, we will start to be responding to the fragmentation of the mind. Now, a discipline that helps to bridge between different ontologies, discourses, methods, ways of theorizing, bringing evidence together. The discipline that does that is philosophy, right? So what you want is you want some philosophical training in how discourses, and I mean this very deeply, how disciplines, ways of theorizing, observing, studying reality, these different levels of the reality of the mind, right? You need a discipline that is capable of trying to bridge between those vocabularies, and that's philosophy. Now, if I take this philosophy and I get training in this and I get training in these, and I start to try to bridge between the disciplines to avoid the equivocation and to facilitate grasping the causal interaction, then I'm doing cognitive science. So in the next episode, we'll talk a lot more about the nature and practice of cognitive science. But I hope you can see already how it's going to be relevant to trying to understand the machinery of meaning making and the fragmentation of ourselves and our identities that is at work within the scientific revolution. Thank you for your time and attention.
Bum, 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 bum.
Meow, 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 meow. Ruff, ruff, ruff. Ruff, ruff, ruff. Ruff, ruff. Ruff, 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 ruff. Ruff, ruff. Ruff, ruff. Ruff. Okay, we're back. We're back. What's up? What's up, everybody? Yeah, okay, so that was a heavy episode. Yeah, we left off with Moby Dick. He pointed out that Moby Dick is a particularly good story because it covers the nomological, normative, and narrative orders that collapsed in the 1900s. So in understanding how we may try and deal with the collapse was really the subject matter of this last section of this episode.
Yeah. And it became pop culture. So
that's right.
Just to rehash, nomological is like, why do we exist? What's the reason for existing?
Yes.
Normative is what's normal and how do you rank, like what's the most normal and what the universe should be. And then there's the narrative, which is the story that allows you to fuse the first one with the second one in a way that you can digest
and understand
as
and
human beings.
Utilize.
Yeah.
That's right. So he said, you know, there's a bunch of figures that we could go over here. Dostoevsky, Conrad, Solzhenitsyn would be another one I would bring in. I would bring in George Orwell. So many people. But really, to get to the heart of the matter and to actually engage ourselves in the solution-making process, Vervaeke is promoting a cognitive scientific analysis of meaning-making itself, so that we can understand how to respond and awaken in a way that does not enmesh us in further dilemma. You know, that gives us a way beyond utopian ideologies, affords us the capacity to engineer new practices, psychotechnologies, psychotechnologies being techniques of the mind or of the psychology, such as language and mathematics. We have a lot of psychotechnologies as human beings, and he's proposing that it's time for a new one.
Yeah, and so he's getting to the other side of this coin, you know, not the historical, like, you know, what has happened through history and how do we respond to that, but
he's basically he showed us
cognitive
at the end. He broke down what he's done in the first 25 episodes. He's given us an anthropological perspective. He's given us a scientific perspective, cognitive perspective. So many, and at the very end here, he shows us all of these different disciplines and these ways of understanding the mind. And he's like, how can we get these to come into conversation? Well, we find that philosophy actually helps to do that. You can bring everything into conversation, all the various disciplines in schools of ways of trying to understand the mind. So we can bring in neuroscience into conversation with computer science.
Within the mind, what we're really trying to look at least at this point in time, is like the machinery of the mind.
Yes.
Like
how do we make meaning?
Yeah.
Where are the pitfalls between these different ways of understanding how our mind works? Because with all of these different ways of understanding the mind that are all advancing independently of one another, it's actually fragmenting our understanding of what we are. It's confusing our understanding of what we are. They're not in conversation, so they're not able to understand each other. The individual human nowadays is just kind of lost. Like, what am I? Who am I?
Well, why are we trying to discuss the machinery of the mind? Because we're trying to rescue something.
Yes.
That axial understanding, and we're trying to do it in a way.
We're trying to feel like we're in participation with reality again, right?
That is
co-creation.
Well, we're trying to do it in a way that is particularly not the last way we freaking did it.
Yes, because all the equivocating that we can do with competing different ideas,
but
ideologies competing with one another, it just becomes further and further discursive argument. Yeah. And it just becomes a downward spiral. We need a way.
That's the talking about it.
Yes.
We got to
find ways to integrate
not
them
just
together.
talking about it and doing it together.
Yes, so that we can integrate these different ideas.
Reintegrating
the disciplines in conversation.
Reintegrating the what is the word? Sapiential communal aspect of this.
Yes.
Of looking back at it.
Yeah. Go beyond equivocation to meaning making.
So he describes what is the cog-sci. Let's see.
There's different levels of the mind that are discussed.
Yeah.
Each one of these disciplines uses different language and different evidence. So we start out with neuroscience.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So understanding the brain to understand the mind, right?
So we have the mind, right? And there's a bunch of different philosophies, schools, and
this
techniques,
organ of understanding,
practices, and disciplines that are trying to describe the mind. One way you can describe it is by its physical components.
That's it. Yep.
So you got like the brain, the neuroscience, what is like the shape of the nerves and what chemicals do they respond to, and all that stuff.
Together, how it maps
So it's
out.
like, what is the framework of the monkey, right? You're experimenting on the monkey. You're looking at the monkey's brain. What's the framework of that?
Yeah,
the next one,
try to understand the monkey's mind.
The next one is making the monkey do. Like, so how
computer
would you,
science?
Well, how would you make the monkey do something? You need a process. You could use a program, an algorithm, or something to make monkey jump up, walk up this way, grab banana, and
like
do
a
things.
Training technique, yeah.
Yeah, so that would be within your
programs, algorithms,
yeah, your basic AIs, make monkey do thing.
Okay, that's a good explanation. That's a good way to see it. So that's what humans are trying to do with computer science.
So it's the monkey within the framework. So like the second one actually needs a third one, but I'm going to explain the second one without the third one. So you can imagine like, monkey with monkey bars. Make monkey go across monkey bars. Has to reach across. You can have an algorithm that makes monkey reach across, right? So that's the monkey within the framework, and within the framework of the mind, do this, fire this neuron, do this thing, do that. The next one is why monkey? Why does monkey across the monkey bars? That's the ontological end. Behavior? Is like why?
There you go.
Yeah, the why.
The ontological.
Why oh monkey why?
Yeah. And so this is psychology. This is the field of psychology. It utilizes working memory, long-term memory,
and you have to test it. Like, how do you know?
Experiential, statistical data. Yeah.
You make simulations, so like you can like whatever horrific experiments we heard about. Like if you've ever taken a psychology class, you probably heard about like the people that shocked people, what they thought to death, and all that stuff. You're creating an experiment to understand why monkey why. So you're creating simulations to see why the monkey swings from bar to bar to bar to bar to bar to bar to bar.
So we're seeing there's different levels of the mind that are trying to be understood. Each one of these disciplines uses different language, and it proposes its explanations in different forms of evidence.
That's the language. Monkey telling monkey, hey, swing across these bars.
There it is, and now we're on to language, which is another way of understanding the mind, through linguistics. And he makes the point at this point in explanation to say, and see how these things are actually starting to try and create hybrids, because there's also the field of psycholinguistics, which is psychology plus linguistics, to understand the grammar of how we make judgments, and then we test judgments in linguistics.
And it almost seems like
see the validity
linguistics
of this
and the they have a mutual relationship, whereas like use the language to explain the observation of the experiment. So there's a observation going one way and a linguistics coming back on the other within the why monkey why, and then how do I tell you about, like, I'm making this monkey go on the monkey bars, and then explaining the psychological trauma that you dealt to them.
Right.
And all, like sorry, my notes are a little confused at this point, but yeah, it's
and then we also understand the mind through our culture, through distributive cognition.
Beyond monkey.
Yes.
Yes.
And so
Multiple.
cultures develops, collectively. So this is our distributive cognition. This is how we solve the greatest problems. So you understand that through anthropology. And our anthropology utilizes participant observation. So there's the language, participatory. You have to participate in the practice. You have to go through a transformation, basically, and be in a culture, immerse yourself so much that you are transformed by it, such that you can know it. It's the only way to understand culture deeply. So that's how anthropology does it. And so we're noticing that all of these different explanations are equivocal. Science is fragmenting what mind means. Therefore, it's fragmenting our ideas of who and what we are.
And now we have to find out how to capture the meaning and understanding between these fractured levels of understanding.
Because when we don't know who and what we are, then we are easily prone to pseudo-religious ideologies, and we have seen what that does.
Yeah.
We have seen that all the methods that we've tried, fundamentalism doesn't work, scientific materialism doesn't work.
Perhaps what we should be looking at, and I
the
think
secular alternatives don't work.
This is what, like, I think John Vervaeke was getting at, is like what we should be looking at is like all these different methods. We should be looking at what makes them so interdependent, and what not like why are they all connected, but like what are the things in between that connect everything, and where are the little avenues that everything leads back to? Why does the monkey go across the bars? What's the programming? But also like what's in here? But also what's the incentive? And what did he learn from the other monkeys? And why the chicken cross? Why'd the chicken cross the road? That is now a very deep concept. If we apply
incredibly
this to
deep.
that.
So you need a new way of understanding. So I think it's wise of Vervaeke to recognize the value of cognitive science in helping us find a way to unify all of these methodologies and have them be able to communicate together. And to understand where's the pitfalls.
Yeah, that's the essence of cognitive psychology, is the embracing of all these methods
It's a
all together.
multidisciplinary approach to understanding the mind.
Which is actually kind of great, because we can get like intellectual scientists to actually like work together instead of arguing with each other. It'd be great. Hey, CogSci, let's bring us together.
Informed by anthropology and philosophy and computer science and linguistics, like that's actually really inspiring. That's exciting. I like the sound of that. So we know philosophy is capable of bridging the gaps between all of these. And so once you bring philosophy into the fold to help understand the mind and communicate and help us understand, like philosophy can basically be like a mediator or a translator between all of these different disciplines. Now we're able to find a way to understand meaning making and how we can create new psychotechnologies to upgrade our meaning making capacities, like systems, or I guess methods such as dialogos, that Vervaeke is actually an ongoing conversations with others on this path of understanding. And he has several examples of dialogos conversations on his page on YouTube here. I highly recommend checking those out, and also the new wisdom series that he has ongoing now. Marries very well with the Meaning Crisis series here. So we're moving along, man. That's episode 25. We have made it officially. We're past halfway through. Or I guess we're actually exactly halfway through.
Oh, let's not play that game. Math gets funny.
It does get funny like that. But we did it. We made it. We made it halfway, guys.
Yeah,
Celebration
boy.
time. Still alive and kicking.
All right. Well, I think
It's a beautiful spring day.
I'll pour myself
It's a
a
beautiful
vodka
spring
soda.
night. That was That was an awesome episode. Thank you for
Well,
journeying with me through the first 25 here, brother.
Got through it without crying. All right.
Yeah.
Got a little bit of the cry crusties.
It's helpful to have someone to do this with, man. It really is. It helps buoy me. It keeps the spirits higher, and we're able to tackle these. Tackling a big problem alone is always very overwhelming and distressing. But when you have somebody by your side, you feel a lot more secure. And
teamwork makes the dream work.
Does it, man? It does. Thank you all for joining us, for being here with us on this learning journey. We got 25 more episodes to go, and we will have conquered awakening from the meaning crisis, and perhaps we will be then in the process of awakening in a way that is most conducive to our species' long-term survival.
Well, by the end of it, hopefully you have a few more that are on the path, whether it's because of us or any other thing,
Right.
I don't care. I don't care the means. I care the ends, and the ends are, I do care the means. Like, don't go doing negative stuff, but like, I don't care if it comes from us or watching Vervaeke directly or talking with the crazy crackhead homeless bum.
No,
that's got some insightful
this
stuff.
is seriously like pure existential dread that is motivating me into this place. And it's love. It's a deep love for humanity and this planet.
I'd rather
seeing
have the
where
love.
we're at is heartbreaking.
Yeah,
it is very distressing. And to find something that actually provides actionable solutions and comprehensive explanation as to why we got to where we are, it's very heartening. So thank you, John Vervaeke, and all of those that helped make his work possible, including the people that are running his YouTube and probably seeing us sharing him left and right. Thank you, guys.
And the guy running the camera, guy or girl running the camera and the sound, and had to deal with like the sound artifacts from a few episodes ago that I heard.
Oh yeah,
which like things mess up. Hey, you guys did great. So if you watch it, you guys did great too. Behind the scenes,
nice.
Thankless warriors. Go.
Nice, man.
Give it up for the fucking techs and the grips and
the
all them
warriors, man. I dig it. Yeah, and that's definitely why I'm doing this podcast, and why DJ I know is here with me as well. We're trying to find a way to awaken together, to change this world from the inside out.
That's right.
Because what else can you do, man? It feels a lot better to at least do something and to face it rather than hide from it.
Yeah.
I can't keep sweeping this worry under the rug. It's too big.
You can only nap for so long before reality catches back up to you. And I'd rather be awake during the day than wake up from a nap in the middle of the night, not being able to see nothing and then being terrified.
Yeah.
So
and the number of people talking about potential civil war during the COVID epidemic period helped me realize that I think people are ready for this conversation now. I think we're ready.
Yeah,
the reality of what we confront, what we face, how close we are to
if we're going to wage war,
potentials.
Let's be civil about it and not have a civil war.
Seriously.
Be kind, polite, use our words.
Because, right now it probably wouldn't just be like a two-sided civil war. It would be what would you call a fractional war.
You would just see burning in the streets, and
you would
and
have various gangs,
people
and
fleeing from cities, and then coming out to the
Yeah.
country, and the people in the country being like,
I can
"Don't break your
guarantee
crap
the
here."
entire left ain't staying together, and the entire right ain't staying together. They're going to be splintering and fragmenting into different opposing groups,
Sure.
all with their own ideas.
I can
We
tell
do
you,
not want this.
I can tell you that from personal experience. If I'm talking to one of my liberal friends, I'm the most conservative person you'll ever meet. If I'm talking to one of my conservative friends, I'm super hippy dippy.
To them, yeah, right. Let's
I'll
try and
call
be
both
that,
of them out.
guys.
I don't care.
Let's be more
Call them out.
of everything
Let's go.
that is reasonable and worthwhile.
Use both parts of your brain, the conservative and the liberal
You have a
part
left
of
and
your
a right
brain.
side of your brain. That's right. You have an
Use
analytical
them.
and you have a super imaginative, creative side.
Think.
Not just think, but care.
Yeah.
And stop being so damn certain.
Think, care.
It helps.
Feel with all of yourself. Don't be too sure about yourself.
Question
delight
everything.
in being wrong. It's great because you're
Question
like, haha, I
everything.
know something now.
Yeah.
I
Question,
I'm
especially
wrong.
your own self, especially when you're particularly certain about something. Challenge your own beliefs, your own conceptions, your preferred ideals and ideas. Challenge it all.
And frankly, stop keeping your
See
mouth
what
shut when you
stands
hear
the
things
test.
that are obviously wrong and evil.
That's true too.
Yeah,
I'm tired of keeping quiet and being afraid of losing family and friends over saying what I
I
know
don't
to
even
be
have
true
to
in my
talk
heart.
politics. I'll talk about the things that we're like talking about here about meaning making, and
Yeah,
people get
yeah.
weirded out and just be like, "You shouldn't talk about those things." I'm like,
What?
Nothing I was talking about is like political. You want something political? Let's go, Brandon. I don't know. Do you want me to piss you off?
Picking up on the fact that this could call into question their preferred belief system.
Well, how dare you? How dare you show thinking? Because if you show thinking, then I got to think, and that's work for me.
Yeah, right.
I don't know. Don't let me get bitter.
Let's think together.
I'm grumpy.
And stop being so egoic. I think we can do that.
Yeah, we can try.
One love, fam.
We can try.
We're all here together. We got to figure this out together, and we're not going to be able to figure it out alone or in small groups.
Not at this point.
Take as many humans on this planet
we're too
together at once as we
interconnected.
can get.
We're too interconnected for that. It's not going to happen on like small tribal ends. It's.
Yeah, so grow here with us, guys. That's what we're doing here on Actuali. We're just growing together. We're trying to figure it out together, and we're willing to upgrade and renew our ideas as we go. And we encourage you to join us in that endeavor.
Yeah, and on that note, turn it into a pumpkin.
All right, guys. I've been Chris.
I've been DJ.
Talk to you soon.